Our protagonist had tried absolutely everything. Everyone scoffed at him for choosing the gunslinger class, universally considered the absolute worst. But little did they know, he had actually picked a legendary class. Before his awakening, though, his past life had been complete trash. His sister was erased right in front of him, while Lu Yi was powerless to do a thing. The bullies glared down at him and brutally threw his sister to the ground. He could only cry, too weak to even stand up. At that moment, a sword pierced his back. The men laughed as they kicked him and his sister, calling them weaklings. Lu Yi kept breathing, regretting his entire life. His greatest dream had been to protect his sister, but he never imagined that the game, Yuan World, would become a horrifying reality, and every player would suddenly gain the powers they had in the game. But since he hadn't played much, he was stuck with a pathetically weak character. Even so, he was a total Chad. Driven by pure fury, he wouldn't let those bastards laugh. At his sister's death, Lu Yi stood up screaming and violently slammed the sword into that bastard's head. Only then did he finally fall to the ground, content at last to die in peace. But then, something truly unbelievable happened. He suddenly woke up in his bed, 3 whole years before the game became reality. Liu Yi bolted upright, completely unable to believe what was happening. He distinctly remembered being killed. Looking around, he didn't recognize his surroundings, until he realized it was his old apartment, the very place he'd lived 3 years ago. Suddenly, the door swung open, and a sweet female voice echoed through the room. Liu Yi froze, utterly unable to believe his eyes. In the hallway stood his beloved sister, holding a small box that contained the access key for the game, Yuan World. With a trembling voice, he desperately asked what year it was. Liu Yun, surprised by the sudden question, joked that he seemed to have woken up in a bad mood, then casually told him the year was 2030. That hit him hard. Liu Yi stood motionless, utterly unable to believe what he was hearing. Leaping up, he quickly ran to the window, his mouth agape in disbelief. He realized he had returned to the exact day the game, Yuan World, first went live. Without a second thought, he hugged his sister tightly and promised himself that this time around, he wouldn't let them die. He would become the strongest player, as long as this wasn't all just a dream. It was July 27th, 2030. The virtual reality game, Yuan World, was officially launched, and on September 1st, it took complete control of the world. All players suddenly received the abilities of their in-game characters. The marginalized and lower classes of society suddenly acquired incredible real-world powers. For the first time ever, they felt a strength they never imagined they could possess. Because of this, chaos erupted, and endless wars for money and power began. Our protagonist chose the path of a player who simply explored the game's world. This led him to a tragic fate due to his low level. He ended up dying in Yuan World. However, by some miracle, he had an unexpected stroke of luck. He was reborn and returned 3 years in time, to the exact moment the game was about to be released. This time, he was determined to become the absolute strongest. Mentally, he returned to reality, and was surprised when his sister pushed him away. Without realizing it, he had started to hug her. She was extremely embarrassed, thinking her brother was just messing with her. Scratching his head, he gave an awkward smile and said, surprised that it really did seem like that. We fast forward 8 hours to the launch of Yuan World. Our protagonist put on his virtual reality headset and lay down on his bed. He knew there were only 34 days left before the game would dominate the world. If he could become the strongest player in that time, he and his sister wouldn't die. Upon entering the game, he appeared in the bustling starting plaza, where several players were already gathered. In the center, an administrator. He was about to demonstrate the incredible power of his ability, known simply as strength. His initial strike seemed deceptively simple, slicing a massive rock only halfway precisely. However, by intensely focusing his energy, he launched another devastating attack with a single move, splitting the rock in two as if it were mere butter. This incredible demonstration utterly shocked Liu Yi, who watched with his jaw practically on the floor. Immediately after the training ended, the system instantly warped our protagonist directly into the game, right at the spawn point. Several other players gazed around, dazzled by the wonders of this new world. But Lu Yi had only one burning focus in mind: to level up as quickly as humanly possible. He firmly decided to choose the strength ability, as it was widely considered the most mysterious and truly defined the difference between a common player and a true warrior. Without wasting any precious time, he immediately set off in search of the training pavilion. Within the vast world of Yuan World, there were no traditional fixed combat classes, only a distinct division based on the weapons used. Armed with this crucial knowledge, Lu Yi knew he had to master a weapon as quickly as possible, as the very foundation of power lay in its complete mastery. Once he reached 100% proficiency with a chosen weapon, he would gain complete mastery over the strength ability itself. Driven by this intense sense of urgency, he raced towards the weapons pavilion, worried that all the prime training areas would be packed. However, to his utter surprise, when he finally entered the Grand Hall, he realized it was completely, eerily empty. Lu Yi didn't mind. He was utterly determined to achieve his goal. He strode straight to the main weapon rack and began his crucial selection. The katana was his absolute favorite weapon, so he decided to kick things off with it. But he knew he had to thoroughly test all available options. After 5 grueling hours of intense training, he was utterly exhausted. Even so, he managed to completely master the use of the katana, solidifying it as his primary weapon. Despite his fatigue, he knew he had no time to lose. Without a moment's hesitation, he picked up a long sword and immediately began a new training cycle, pushing himself to his absolute limits, completely pushing past his exhaustion. Inside the bustling weapons pavilion, a couple strolled casually through the corridors, marveling at the incredibly realistic surroundings. Suddenly, though, the girl spotted a training area tucked behind her boyfriend. Piqued by the sounds echoing from within, she wondered aloud what could possibly be inside. The guy glanced up, spotting the sign above the entrance, and casually noted it was likely a training area. Without a moment's hesitation, the girl eagerly peeked around the doorway's corner. And that's when she saw our protagonist, relentlessly training with his sword, honing his every strike against a wooden dummy. What immediately caught her, it was Lu Yi being the only one there. A rather strange sight indeed. The couple then moved toward the nearby weapon rack, but didn't pick up any weapons themselves. They wanted to grasp the training mechanics first. After watching for just a few minutes, they disdainfully tossed their weapons to the ground, declaring it a boring activity fit only for losers. As they started to leave, the guy offhandedly explained that the training pavilion was solely for boosting weapon proficiency, offering no other real advantages. He even stressed that reaching 100 proficiency in any weapon would demand at least 10,000 strikes. The girl quickly suggested they leave right away and invest that precious time in leveling up instead. The guy agreed instantly, and before leaving, the girl cast one last look back at Lu Yi. For some reason, he had become etched in her memory. Lu Yi, for his part, hadn't even noticed anyone was there at all. He struck relentlessly, showing absolutely no intention of resting. On the first day, he completely mastered both the katana and the halberd, but his long-awaited special ability still wasn't granted. By the second day, he reached maximum mastery with the spear, axe shield, and hammer. Still, his power utterly refused to awaken. On the third day, while other players had already reached levels 10 to 20, Lu Yi was still stuck at level 1, his true strength remaining stubbornly hidden, and it truly left him wondering. He briefly considered leveling up first, before resuming his intense training, but he quickly dismissed that thought. If he truly wanted to become the strongest player, he had to unlock his ultimate ability, no matter the cost. Nothing would stand in his way ever again. Meanwhile, out on the bustling street, near the training pavilion, that same curious couple was strolling by, discussing a player's unfortunate death. The penalty in Yuan World was notoriously cruel. Dying meant losing all your hard-earned experience levels. Mid-conversation, the girl spotted Lu Yi again. She was utterly astounded he was still training. Her companion was just as dumbfounded. He scoffed, saying there were far more exciting ways to play, rather than relentlessly grinding for days on end. Intrigued, the girl couldn't fathom Lu Yi's relentless persistence. Her friend then speculated that perhaps Lu Yi knew some hidden secret. Excited, he thought about trying to master a weapon too. However, the girl swiftly shot down his idea. She claimed it was a complete waste of time, since Lu Yi had already been training for 3 whole days, and absolutely nothing had changed. While other players were soaring past level 20, he was simply honing his weapon skills. He wouldn't stand a chance of winning that way. Lu Yi, however, completely ignored the chattering couple. He had a goal and no time for trivial distractions. The girl grew visibly irritated by his obsession. She declared Lu Yi seemed like a total gaming addict, and even if he became the strongest fighter, she would never try weapon training herself. To her, that time was better spent just leveling up. With no patience to stay there any longer, she tugged her friend's arm, insisting they leave. They needed to rack up more experience. Pronto. Days later, our protagonist received an unexpected notification. He had mastered 18 types of weapons, and, as a result, earned the title of Weapon Master. Now he was able to use the abilities and characteristics of the other 17 weapons, with any main weapon he chose. With a whip now firmly in his hands. Exhausted, he stood frozen, his eyes wide. He processed a message before him. He simply couldn't grasp what was unfolding. He'd mastered every melee weapon imaginable, yet his long-awaited special ability never manifested. That's why he decided to ditch bladed weapons. Perhaps his true talent lay in firearms. Without delay, he headed straight for the firearms pavilion. As he walked, a curious thought crossed his mind. In his previous life, he'd never once encountered a player who wielded power using firearms. Upon entering the pavilion, an impressive hall revealed itself before him. An immense variety of weapons filled the space, arranged on metal racks. Without hesitation, Liu y quelque chose à pistole. The days were passing quickly. More than 5 days had already gone by, and he was certain other players had already reached level 30. Meanwhile, he was still stuck at level 1. Gazing at the huge selection of weapons, Louis felt a tightness in his chest. There were simply too many options, and because of that, the world might be taken over. Before he could master them all, for a moment, he questioned if it was even worth continuing. But then, the memory of his sister's death came rushing back. With full force, that level 20 player who killed her. Blood boiled in his veins. He had no choice. He couldn't turn back now. Without power, he would never become the strongest player. Taking a deep breath, he raised the pistol and began his grueling training. Even if his destiny was to die again, he would never give up. Meanwhile, at the training pavilion, the girl who'd previously mocked Lu Ye's dedication decided to come back and check on his progress. However, when she looked inside, she found no one. Surprised, she thought he had given up and left for good. Suddenly, a loud bang echoed through the area. The thunderous sound made her freeze in place. What was that? Instinctively, she followed the noise and went up the stairs toward the firearms pavilion. Peeking around the corner of the door, she was dumbfounded. Louis had stopped shooting. The reason? He had absolutely obliterated the training target. Around him, a strange greenish aura flickered, as if his very existence was shifting. The girl clapped her hands over her mouth, stifling a scream, her eyes wide with pure horror. What on earth was happening to him? Louis, for his part, remained paralyzed, not looking at anything. He seemed lost in a void, but in reality, he was actually reading the notification he'd been waiting for so long. The message read, "Congratulations. You have reached 100 mastery. With the pistol, as a reward, you have acquired a new ability." A shiver ran down Lu Ye's spine. He had finally received his power. Now, for the first time, he felt ready for the impending disaster. A faint laugh escaped his lips. The next step was clear. Level up and catch up to the other players. His stats were basic: Strength 5, Agility 5, Endurance 5, Intelligence 5, Senses 5. The only exception was his special resistance, which had only 1 point. Additionally, a new passive skills icon had appeared, but it was empty. Heading for the exit, Lu Yi was ready to start leveling up. However, as he reached the door, he noticed a girl standing in the hallway. She tried to act natural, looking away and casually whistling a tune, pretending she hadn't seen anything. Lu Yi, however, didn't waste time trying to figure out if she'd seen something or not. He simply walked right past her as if she wasn't even there. The girl, in turn, felt strangely embarrassed. A wave of irritation washed over her, and she didn't understand why she was so flustered. She wanted to ask what had happened inside the pavilion, wanted to understand the strange aura she saw around Lu Yi. But she hesitated in the end. She remained silent upon leaving the training pavilion. Lu Yi had a sudden realization. Only a weapon truly tailored to its wielder could unlock its true power. With this thought in mind, he decided to head straight to the equipment shop. He needed to pick up a pistol, some ammunition, and a reliable close combat weapon. On his way, he overheard some startling rumors about Yuan World. The most significant piece of information he gathered was that the game had already hit a massive milestone. 10 million online players. This only intensified his previous concerns. Time was slipping by way too quickly. Upon arriving at the shop, Lu Yi carefully selected his gear. He acquired a low-level pistol, the White Dragon, which set him back 500 coins. He also snagged a box of 300 common bullets for 300 coins, and a low-level dagger that cost him 200. In total, he blew 1,000 coins on his new acquisitions. As he left the shop, he felt a pang of discouragement. The prices were simply exorbitant, and the fact that the in-game currency held a real-world monetary value made everything feel even pricier to him. The company behind Yuan World, he thought, had really gone overboard with their item pricing. Still, he couldn't deny his satisfaction with his new weapons. Gazing at the dagger, a brilliant idea suddenly struck him. Without a moment's hesitation, he activated his special skill, Weapon Master. This incredible skill allowed him to completely bypass weapon limitations and transfer the powers of one weapon to another. The first true test of his newfound power was about to begin. Determined to put his skills to the ultimate test, Lu Yi headed straight to the Mirror Kingdom Gaming Company. This unique place allowed players to create a mirrored, identical copy of themselves to fight against. The rules were deceptively simple. If a player managed to defeat their copy, they would earn extra money and valuable experience. However, there were two crucial conditions to participate. The player needed to be at least 5 levels below their mirror copy, and also pay 10% of their current gold to enter the fight. For Lu Yi, these conditions weren't a problem at all. In fact, it was the perfect scenario for him. He was still at level 1, but now he wielded truly formidable power. As he strode through the Mirror Kingdom's Grand Hall, a frustrated cry echoed sharply through the room. 2 players then emerged from the respawn point, grumbling loudly about the extreme difficulty of battling their mirrored copies. It seemed they'd lost everything they had earned. Nearby, 2 other players watched the entire scene with an ironic smirk. They openly mocked the defeated players, and, noticing Lu Yi, quickly turned their attention to him. One of them, spotting the pistol holstered at the boy's waist, let out a contemptuous laugh. To him, it was the absolute worst weapon choice in the game. The other player also scoffed, convinced Lu Yi was nothing more than an inexperienced newbie, utterly delusional, to think he could possibly win with such inferior gear. Lu Yi remained silent, merely observing the players. They had no idea what he was truly capable of now. Lu Yi, after solidifying his decision, mentally braced himself for his very first battle. In the daunting Mirror Kingdom, he knew that due to his stark lack of experience, the odds were heavily stacked against him. However, he also understood he had no other choice but to fight. He then accessed the system menu to familiarize himself with its interface. After browsing for just a moment, another notification promptly appeared, asking for confirmation to face a mirror player. Despite his mounting fear, Lu Yi confirmed his participation, fully aware of the dire consequences. The system then displayed another crucial notification, requesting confirmation for the 100 coin participation fee. After accepting, a second, urgent notification appeared, reminding him that once inside the Mirror Kingdom, players could not leave until the battle concluded. Just a few moments later, Lu Yi found himself abruptly transported to the arena. His opponent was a formidable player, clearly ready for combat. The intense countdown then began. The battle set to start in mere 10 seconds. As the countdown reached the 5-second mark, Lu Yi's nerves finally got the best of him. He had never fought anyone of his own free will before, and the sheer fear of confrontation was utterly overwhelming. His leg began to shake uncontrollably. distracting him even further. Trying to calm himself, he tapped his leg repeatedly. However, this slight distraction made him completely miss the battle's opening. His opponent, wielding a formidable red sword, charged in an instant. Liu Yi thought his battle was forfeit before it even started. But to his utter surprise, he miraculously dodged the first strike and tried to shoot down his enemy. Unfortunately, every single one of his bullets missed its mark, and as he lost his footing, he nearly stumbled. The enemy kept pressing forward and, taking advantage of Liu Ye's instability, disarmed him with terrifying ease. Now weaponless, Liu Yi had to confront that fearsome red sword. With only his bare physical strength, the enemy seemed absolutely certain of their victory. Yet in that crucial moment of doubt, Liu Yi realized he absolutely couldn't give up. This was his precious second chance at life, and he wasn't going to lose it now. He activated his formidable Master Archer skill, which allowed him to instantly modify the blade's properties. With the blade's newly increased strength, Liu Yi easily blocked the enemy's sword strike. The blade's enhanced power allowed him to unleash a devastating counterattack with a strength he never knew he possessed. With incredible skill and precision, he sliced straight through the enemy's sword, rendering it useless, and then swiftly defeated him. Despite his incredible victory, Liu Yi was still trembling violently with nerves. His hands were shaking, and his breathing was ragged, a reaction he simply couldn't control. He felt a fresh wave of frustration, and not being able to calm down even after this hard-won victory. Meanwhile, just a few minutes earlier, two other players were casually walking through the arena, discussing their tactical plans to gather members for their respective teams. They talked about how incredibly tough it was to win battles in the Mirror Kingdom, especially with the large clans, competing against smaller, independent teams. As Liu Yi was celebrating his hard-earned victory, the two players who had been observing his fight were utterly stunned by the outcome. They couldn't believe that a mere level 1 player, with such minimal gear, had managed to defeat an opponent 5 levels higher. But in reality, these two players weren't seeking allies at all. Instead, they were busy placing bets on other players, eagerly hoping to rake in a hefty profit. One of them swiftly checked the betting odds on a mysterious site known as Backstage Garden, desperate to see just how much they'd snatch from their wagers. The other, meanwhile, meticulously analyzed Liu Ye's every movement, intrigued by how such a low-level player could possibly defeat his opponent. Liu Yi, focused, watched his opponent's strikes closely as the intense countdown to battle continued. The green-haired guy intently watched Liu Ye's every move, declaring that the answer had finally arrived. The second player commented that it was an excellent choice, never tearing his eyes from Liu Yi. Both were desperate to see which mirror copy Liu Yi would choose, hoping they could quickly place their bets. Liu Yi quickly checked his own stats. He had leveled up to 5, and his attributes had shockingly doubled. But despite that, he still felt weak. He realized he absolutely needed to get stronger to finally overcome his crippling fear of battle. If he didn't, he would quickly meet his end. With renewed determination, he immediately chose his next formidable opponent, a mirror copy ranked 55th, a terrifying foe known as Strikes. The system teleported him to the arena almost instantly. The two guys watching Liu Yi were eagerly waiting to bet on his fight. But then, they were utterly confused when they saw his opponent. They were absolutely shocked when they realized Liu Yi had chosen a level 10 mirror copy, the brutal one nicknamed Strikes. The green-haired guy snapped back to reality, realizing that Liu Yi had picked the absolute strongest possible opponent out of hundreds of other level 10 adversaries. He frantically wondered what would happen to their bet, desperately hoping it hadn't been registered yet. But the white-haired guy grimly revealed the bet had already been placed, and there was absolutely nothing they could do. He desperately hoped that if they lost, his green-haired friend wouldn't tell anyone about this disastrous bet, as he absolutely refused to be embarrassed. The bookmaker then unveiled the betting odds for the fight, displaying the wagers placed on Liu Yi and Strikes. Upon seeing the odds, the two guys felt their spirits sink. The total bets favoring Strikes' victory soared past 200,000. All hope drained from them instantly. Just then, Strikes suddenly materialized before Liu Yi. Strikes, brandishing a katana, was fully equipped with the persistent fighter set. But Liu Yi, by contrast, a mere level 5 player, only had a pistol, a dagger, and some basic gear. The countdown to the intense battle had begun. And the moment Liu Yi saw his opponent, his legs began to tremble uncontrollably again. This enraged him to halt the shaking. He plunged his dagger into one of his own legs. With only 2 agonizing seconds left before the battle, he took a resolute fighting stance, fully determined not to repeat the blunders of his first fight. The instant the battle began, Liu Yi wasted no time and immediately charged straight towards Strikes. He skillfully dodged Strikes' relentless attacks. Although Liu Yi's pistol packed a punch, his aim was far from perfect, so Strikes managed to either dodge or block most of the shots. After only a few moments, Strikes grew impatient and swiftly disarmed Liu Yi. Without a shred of hesitation, Strikes went in for a fatal blow. It seemed like this blow would be utterly impossible to dodge, but Liu Yi wasn't about to give up that easily. He activated his incredible special ability, and his eyes began to glow with an eerie blue light. Liu Yi performed an astonishing forward leap, narrowly evading Strikes' deadly blow. After sliding back a short distance, he realized Strikes wasn't pursuing him. With a precious moment to recover, Liu Yi quickly assessed the situation. His health stood at a mere 20 out of 100, and his cognitive power was at 28 out of 30. The battle had only just begun, but Liu Yi was already solely focused on his survival. Liu Yi was now just one agonizing step away from defeat. His normal attacks couldn't even leave a scratch on his opponent, and he suddenly realized he had chosen an adversary he simply couldn't hope to defeat. He should have opted for a much weaker fighter and used that valuable time to level up instead of pushing so far. So fast. But even so, after a brief moment of hesitation, Liu Yi snapped back into his fighting stance, finding it almost laughable just how challenging this was. He was convinced that to conquer his fear, he had to keep fighting, absolutely refusing to give up. Realizing that simply standing there was not an option, he decided to charge directly at his foe. At one crucial moment, the hero deftly twisted aside to narrowly dodge a fatal blow that would have undoubtedly drained all his health. However, Liu Yi had severely underestimated his opponent's speed. In mere seconds, Strikes materialized behind him, catching him completely off guard. Liu Yi quickly realized he stood no chance of winning directly, so he decided to risk absolutely everything. Just before the fatal blow, he spun around to face Strikes, drew his pistol, and fired. In a climactic final clash, both exchanged devastating fatal blows. Strikes' katana sliced Liu Yi clean in half, while the shot from Liu Yi's pistol utterly obliterated Strikes' head. The system quickly determined that Liu Yi had dealt the fatal damage faster than Strikes, and just like that, he was declared the winner. His reward included a massive amount of experience, a hefty sum of money, and a much-needed level up. Now Liu Yi was significantly stronger at level 13. All his attributes soared to 17, except for endurance, which only budged by a single point. He let out a profound sigh of relief, realizing he'd been teetering on the brink of death, yet had miraculously triumphed in that incredible battle. Many other notifications flooded in. The most significant, he had finally reached level 10. Now his rebirth ability had fully evolved into the power to choose his very own development path. Meanwhile, the 2 guys who had bet on Liu Yi's victory were now surrounded by a surging crowd, pinned against the wall. Those who had lost the bet were forced to hand over all their money to the other participants. One of the guys was practically on the verge of tears, pleading if they could just fork over half the money instead of their entire fortune. But the one-eyed gang pointed directly at them and declared that wasn't an option at all. They wouldn't be getting out of this loss so easily. The white-haired guy couldn't take it anymore and yelled that he simply couldn't believe they actually thought they had already won. The results weren't even finalized yet. Gang, pointing confidently at the board, declared with certainty that Strikes would triumph. He simply couldn't lose to a rookie, after all. If that happened, though, he was absolutely ready to make a huge scene over the bets. Before Gang's bold proclamation, Strikes was widely regarded as one of the top-tier level 10 players. However, just moments later, the board dramatically updated. To everyone's utter shock, Strikes had been utterly defeated. The surrounding crowd could barely believe their eyes. Their mouths hung open, frozen in disbelief. Their entire world instantly crumbled around them. The green-haired guy, meanwhile, was beaming, absolutely thrilled with the win, and his two friends were ecstatic about their victory. Meanwhile, Lu Yi, our protagonist, was returning victorious from the arena. Suddenly, a mysterious list materialized before him. He gazed at it for the very first time, not fully grasping its meaning, but he decided to finish logging out from the match. Just as he was logging out, his sister entered his room, calling him for dinner. Upon entering the kitchen, Lu Yi wasted no time, immediately digging in. His sister, Yun, mentioned she prepared his favorite mushrooms. But Lu Yi paid her no mind. He was too deeply immersed in his thoughts about Yuan World, where he just discovered two new, unknown skills he didn't even know he possessed. The first skill was Invasion Flame, which boasted an incredible effect. The damage per second dropped from 50 to 25, but the total damage reached around 250 health points. Besides his new skills, Liu Ye also pondered the dangers posed by his opponents, and even considered forming his own team. After eating at lightning speed, he thanked his sister and rushed back to his room. This surprised her, as he'd barely touched a single plate. It even stung her a little, and she thought he might need to find someone else to cook for him soon. Now let's jump back to Yuan World, specifically within the Mirror World's buildings. A man groveled at Gang Zi's feet, pleading to let him keep half the money, just as he had proposed. But the man wasn't that simple. He continued to plead, arguing that all the money he'd bet on Strikes. Victory wasn't his, but belonged to his family. If he lost it all now, he'd likely face severe punishment. Gang Z, still mocking him, pointed out that just moments ago, he had flat out refused that very offer, and now he was making the exact same one. But before he could utter another word, a red-haired guy suddenly appeared and slammed Gang Z's head right against the wall, demanding that he return all the money that was lost in the bet. Against Strike, the red-haired guy's name was Jack, and he hailed from the New Order Guild, the guild in charge of the Mirror World. Gang, still pinned against the wall, tried to explain that the one who defeated Strike had absolutely nothing to do with him. He had only placed the bet himself, and didn't know Lu Yi would choose Strike's copy to defeat. But what Gang said didn't concern Jack in the slightest. Jack retorted that ultimately, the white-haired guy was the one who truly profited, and even if he escaped responsibility here, things would be handled very differently in the real world. Gang tried his absolute best to defend himself and to avoid any trouble in real life. He offered all the money he had won from the bet. Jack, however, suddenly refused, stating he didn't need it, and letting the poor man go. Gang thought for a moment. Then, with a very serious expression, said he had nothing else left to offer as compensation. Jack, with a truly frightening look, simply mentioned a favor Gang would have to do for him. And of course, Gang had no choice but to agree. Now, let's get back to our hero, who logged back into the game after dinner to continue leveling up. He knew he couldn't hesitate, because he needed to be well prepared for Judgment Day. Soon, Lu Yi received a notification, confirming his choice to upgrade the Kaihil skill. Without a moment's hesitation, he confirmed the enhancement, and immediately received 3 notifications. The first notification detailed the skill he'd chosen. The second informed him his tally was complete, and his combat power now stood at 15.6. Additionally, he received a new title, Low-Level Warrior. One of Lu Ye's biggest surprises was realizing that, by choosing this skill, he'd acquired a dual attribute. Several of his stats had surged considerably. Gazing at his stats, he was utterly surprised, as some of his attributes had skyrocketed. Lu Yi recalled becoming incredibly weak after surpassing level 100. Now he realized that, even though he was only level 13, his new traits and powerful bonuses put him on par with a level 26 character. Lu Yi began to reflect on the possibility of defeating a level 20 Strikes with his current strength. However, Lu Yi transformed from an insecure guy into someone confident, determined to challenge Strikes. He now saw him as a truly worthy opponent and wanted to test his strength against him. Then, a notification popped up before him, asking for confirmation for the battle with Strikes, which he promptly accepted. just seconds after he chose his opponent. Bets for the fight started popping up in local bookmakers and the player chat. Someone placed a bet, and two guys Jack had asked to spread the word started promoting it. One of them bet everything he had on the protagonist's victory, which utterly angered the golden-haired man. He didn't need to place bets, but the white-haired young man was convinced that Jack couldn't do anything. Now, even if he tried, he wouldn't get support from his group. The New Order. The blonde guy noticed his friend's disdainful smile and figured that this Jack character had forced him to publicize the odds in favor of the protagonist. However, he didn't understand the point of it all, since it was obvious no one would bet on Liu Yi, and the odds would be incredibly low. But the guy didn't answer, as his only job was to stir up trouble. The scene shifts now to the fierce battle arena, deep within the shimmering mirrored realm. The countdown's on, battle starting in just 10 seconds. On one side, we have Strikes, a level 20 powerhouse, dual-wielding katanas and decked in advanced armor. And facing her, Liu Yi, a mere level 13, armed with only a pistol, a trusty dagger, and basic starter gear. Liu Yi, ever the strategist, began to ponder. He mused that with sufficient cognitive power, he could pinpoint the perfect moment to utterly destroy Strikes. Easily. Then, the system blared, battle start. Our protagonist didn't hesitate for a second, launching himself into an immediate attack. Strikes expertly defended with her katanas, deflecting every single bullet with ease, as Liu Yi relentlessly tried to close the distance, expertly parrying her blows. He then realized his double attributes had virtually eliminated the raw strength difference between them. This discovery instantly boosted his confidence. Now, confronting high-level opponents wouldn't be the terrifying ordeal they once were. Dodging deftly from side to side, Liu Yi continued to rely solely on his pistol, reflecting on his incredible growth in strength. He deliberately allowed his enemy to draw near, just close enough to attack with her daggers, then swiftly aimed for Strike's head, scheming to end this fight in the final seconds. A chilling smile spread across his face as he prepared to dispatch his opponent and conclude the combat. Strikes, on the other hand, was utterly stunned. She couldn't fathom how such a weak, low-level player could possibly attack her like this. Paralyzed, she stood utterly unable to react. The instant Liu Yi locked eyes with his opponent's face, he froze, utterly confused, unsure of what to do. He abruptly canceled the pistol shot. Since our hero had slowed Strikes down, there was ample time for a counterattack. However, after nimbly dodging, Liu Yi sharply jumped back, avoiding all damage. Suddenly, a tidal wave of anger washed over him as he remembered his opponent's face. Freezing in his tracks, he clutched his head, utterly unsure of how to proceed. He couldn't comprehend why he hadn't fired. Was he scared? The thought chilled him to the bone. He was simply terrified of death. Staring at his foe and her weapon, the young man realized he'd never seize his own destiny. Even worse, he felt he'd never truly grow up and would forever cower before anyone in his way. Gripping his gun tighter, he knew his future hinged on this very moment. His opponent, the girl, also understood that only one victor could emerge from this clash, and that the protagonist's very destiny hung in the balance. With an impressive leap, Strikes, they both decided to clash head-on. Strikes landed the first blow, one that should have severed our hero's head, but Liu Yi deftly dodged, swiftly moving behind her. Then he seized her by the head, aimed his gun, and in that instant, his thoughts were crystal clear. He had already grown up. He had become a completely different person. Without a second's hesitation, Liu Yi defeated, and 3 notifications immediately materialized before him. The first announced he had defeated Strikes. The second, that his level had increased. And the third, that he had reached level 20. Now he could choose how to further develop his power. The protagonist's face was incredibly serious. He realized he had not only matured, but was now far ahead of all other players. Meanwhile, back in the lobby, those who had bet on our hero couldn't believe their eyes. They had actually won. Then, unexpectedly, the green-haired guy commented that the bets didn't affect the other players. Even though Jack had opened a second bet on a level 20 Strikes, she still lost to Liu Yi. Now everyone knew just how strong he truly was. The same guy started theorizing that After defeating the level 20 strikes, Lu Yi had probably reached level 22, or even 23. He concluded that Lu Yi could only fight against level 30 mirror copies, whose rewards were exceptionally high. Our hero knew it was strikes, but the guy just couldn't grasp why Lu Yi was so incredibly confident he could actually defeat a level 30 mirror copy of strikes. With 100% certainty, they all assumed that as soon as our protagonist went up against the level 30 strikes, he'd probably lose and be in grave danger. As soon as Lu Yi teleported back into the mirrored realm, he realized he hadn't just grown stronger, but had also surged far ahead of the other players. Looking at the tournament board, he saw a level 30 mirror copy of strikes, still holding that coveted first-place spot. If in previous battles, Lu Yi had managed to prove to himself that he was indeed stronger than other players, now he needed to utterly destroy the level 30 mirror copy of strikes, who most players claimed was absolutely invincible. Even before he entered the battle, rumors started swirling around our protagonist. They said one player had even reset his account just to get revenge on the level 30 strikes. But in the end, he still lost. The titles of Invincible Copy and Strongest Fighter were given to strikes for a very good reason. More importantly, he heard that thanks to this copy, the New Order Guild had become the strongest because of strikes. After that, Lu Yi didn't hesitate. He summoned the system before him. He had a murderous glint in his eyes, absolutely eager for the fight with strikes. The system asked again if Lu Yi really wanted to enter the battle against the level 30 mirror copy of strikes. Of course, he didn't hesitate for a second, and the system immediately transferred him. Jack, watching Lu Yi from a distance, ordered all his subordinates to open bets on strikes. Victory. The scene shifts to two guys. One of them places a confident bet on our protagonist's victory, which makes the green-haired man absolutely lose his patience. He thought that Lu Yi simply had no chance against the level 30 strikes. However, the white-haired guy completely ignored him, insisting that he believed in Lu Yi. Soon, we're brought to the arena where his enemy, the level 30 strikes, was patiently waiting. He wielded a truly unique weapon, a katana named Last Will, and his gear was called Fierce. Lu Yi, on the other hand, was only level 23. He had a pistol, a common dagger, and beginner's gear, making it look like he stood no chance at all. After a moment, a notification popped up for Lu Yi. It informed him that his intelligence stat had surpassed 100 points, increasing his intelligence knowledge power by +1. Focused on the notifications, Lu Yi didn't realize the battle had started. Strikes wasted no time and attacked immediately, dealing 411 damage to Lu Yi's health. Lu Yi was shocked, as he only had 18 health left, and he couldn't believe Strike's speed. The second attack should have finished Lu Yi off, but somehow, he managed to block with his dagger and survive. With each passing second, Lu Yi grew more frustrated with his opponent, as he realized just how serious this fight was. If he had blocked a second later, he would have died with no time to heal. With great difficulty, he parried the attack and dodged back, simultaneously firing his pistol at Strikes. Each bullet flew with stunning accuracy. Lu Yi didn't want to drag out the fight, and try to end it as quickly as possible. However, all his attempts to land a hit were futile. Strikes dodged them easily, as if everything was moving in slow motion for him. In a single move, Strikes closed the distance, ready to end the fight with one blow. Lu Yi was caught off guard. To his surprise, Strikes barely flinched at the dagger attack, and still managed to land a blow, forcing Lu Yi to constantly heal himself. Lu Yi couldn't block the attack. If he hadn't reacted in that split second, it would have been game over for him. However, he recovered just in time, ducking and sidestepping Strike's attack. Lu Yi immediately put some distance between them, and tried again to hit Strikes with his pistol. Suddenly, Lu Yi was lost in thought. He realized that even though his own stats were on par with a level 46 player, Strikes still managed to pressure him. But as Lu Yi composed himself, he knew he wasn't ready to give up just yet. He realized that if this was the extent of Strikes' true power, he could deal massive damage in mere seconds and secure the win. It was then that Lu Yi decided to use his skill, Study a Blessing. This skill boosted all of the target stats and activated a unique state that lasted for a full minute. Lu Yi also studied the curse, which could cause one of 10 effects like weakness, aging, lethargy, stupidity, fatigue, poisoning, hallucinations, perception changes, chaos, and madness. After learning the skill, a notification appeared, confirming that the blessing had been acquired. His combat power was 15, but more importantly, his stats multiplied, giving him a huge advantage over strikes. Lu Yi didn't hesitate. He shouted to activate the blessing, knowing he wasn't high-level enough to beat strikes, but trusting that his boosted stats would be enough. Moments later, a notification appeared. It informed him that he had spent 400 cognitive power points, and that all his stats had increased by 200 for exactly 1 minute, after which they would return to normal. A shimmering white aura began to surround Lu Yi, projecting an aura of terror to everyone before him. It was this aura that gave him courage, as he knew that, by activating the skill for a full minute, he would have enough power to destroy strikes. Caught off guard, strikes froze, bracing for the protagonist's next move. But he quickly decided to take the initiative. He charged forward at full speed, intending to finish Lu Yi once and for all, so he wouldn't have to face him again. Lu Yi thought for a moment. Once he defeated strikes, everyone would know. He was hiding incredible skills and abilities. He'd be hailed as the strongest player, but snapping back to the harsh reality. Lu Yi saw his enemy rapidly closing the distance. As he frantically dodged from side to side, his evasive maneuvers weren't enough to avoid strikes, who was already dangerously close for a direct attack. Without hesitation, Lu Yi aimed his pistol and fired. The first bullet slammed into Strike's chest, making him pause his relentless assault in sheer bewilderment. Even after that initial shot, Lu Yi didn't let up. He relentlessly unloaded clip after clip into his enemy. Just a few seconds later, over 10 bullet holes riddled Strike's body. He looked like he should have crumbled to the ground. But then suddenly, he was completely unharmed and utterly ready to keep fighting. A chilling smile spread across his face. The enemy appeared to grasp the full extent of the situation. As Lu Yi reloaded, Strikes realized the protagonist's stats were dramatically higher than other players at his level. On top of that, he possessed passive skills that would activate at the most critical moments. This was Strike's true, hidden strength. Besides that, the Mirrored Kingdom system worked actively against NEP players, making any victory an even more monumental task. Lu Yi understood that he was a complete exception to this rule, and so he swiftly adopted a determined fighting stance. With his buff's duration on the verge of expiring, he knew he had to finish Strikes before its power faded. Absolutely determined to end this before his time ran out, Lu Yi surged forward and launched his assault on Strikes. Only 25 seconds of the skill's duration remained. As he attacked, a fierce resolve burned. He knew he couldn't lose. His current goal was to finally overcome his past and seize full control of his own destiny, something he had tragically failed to do before. With each new desperate attack, Strikes relentlessly closed in on the protagonist. With just 15 seconds left, Lu Yi leaped back, instantly launching a powerful counterattack. With precious time rapidly running out, Lu Yi fiercely attacked and parried Strike's furious blows, giving his enemy absolutely no time to recover or rest. Just seconds before the skill finally ended, a bullet slammed into Strikes directly in the forehead. Shattering his armor, Strikes began to tremble violently, and his weapon clattered from his grasp. A moment later, his attacks completely ceased. Utterly drained of all strength, he collapsed, unmistakably dead. The system notification began to fade away. The enemy's lifeless body lay on the ground. Lu Yi stared at it, utterly disbelieving. He had defeated the strongest opponent. In the Mirrored World instance, he could already picture the comments on his victory. They would hail him as the strongest player, the one who conquered a level 30 enemy. His mighty strikes, furthermore, and his hidden skills were incredible, granting him the qualities of an invincible warrior. Someone commented that such titles meant nothing to level 30 players, as they belonged to entirely different worlds. In terms of strength, to illustrate, one of the spectators explained that a level 30 player was, at best, like the ground beneath the protagonist's feet, meaning they could never reach his level. The protagonist's imagination sent his self-esteem soaring, lifting his spirits even higher. after his monumental victory against strikes. Several notifications then popped up on his interface. The first one congratulated him on his victory against strikes, while the second informed him of his huge reward in both money and experience. He could barely contain his happiness. Not only had he gained money and experience, but he had also overcome a great fear. Just then, the system teleported him back to the Mirrored Kingdom. In the waiting room, Jack had watched the battle and couldn't believe that Luya had defeated the strongest copy in the Mirrored Kingdom. What infuriated him most, however, was the money he lost betting on strikes to win. Meanwhile, two players who had bet on the protagonist were euphoric, jumping for joy, and a white-haired young man smiled at the chips around him, saying he was right about Luya, and that his bet had truly paid off. He then suggested that from now on, everyone should always follow their instincts. However, his friend grabbed his arm and warned that it was too early to celebrate. After all, so many things could still happen. He advised them both to log off the game and, in real life, move to a different apartment to avoid Jack. The scene then shifts to the real world. Inside our protagonist's house, he's sitting on his bed, silently reflecting on his win against Strix, the game's toughest opponent. Suddenly, the door swings open. A girl steps out from another room, remarking that he must be hungry, and inviting him to grab a bite. However, he had other plans entirely. With a smile on his face, he announced they were going out for a walk, and he'd treat her to some delicious barbecue. As they headed down the stairs, the girl asked her brother, "Where did you get the money? Restaurants are pretty expensive for us." Laughing, he replied, "You won't believe it. I won a huge sum of money in the game, and because of that, we need to celebrate our good fortune." His sister accepted without question, not asking for any more details. The next day, still at our protagonist's house, he made an online purchase. After completing the transaction, he received confirmation that his order would arrive in 2 months. Sitting at the table, he couldn't believe it. In just 24 days, Yuan World was supposed to take over the real world, making those 2 months far too long to wait. Still, he had no choice, as the nearest store he checked was completely out of stock. Instead of letting it get him down, he gathered his determination and decided he needed to work even harder. While waiting, the scene then shifts, and we see two girls walking along the waterfront. They were extremely embarrassed, as all the passers-by were staring at them. The best friend suddenly decided to ask Yin, why did Lu Yi ask the girl on a date? Thoughts began to flood her mind, and she feared something terrible had happened. Yin, however, her beaming smile stretched from ear to ear, and she fell silent for a moment. Lost in thought, she was imagining how she'd introduce her brother to her friend, as that was her true goal after all. The girl was incredibly attractive, came from a good family, and, most importantly, possessed an absolutely wonderful character. If she became her brother's fiancée, Yin would have absolutely nothing more to worry about. A moment later, snapping back to reality, Yin smiled. She replied that her brother missed her terribly, which is why he wanted to see her. Without much expression, her friend asked where she'd been lately, since she hadn't even been responding. In the workgroup chat, Yun started to suspect her friend might have a boyfriend, but even if that were true, she wouldn't give up on her plans. She was firmly decided that the date with Lu Yi would happen. Nian, sighing, adjusted her cap and said she didn't even know how to explain. Suddenly, the girl shouted loudly, revealing that her parents were forcing her to play an incredible online game. Yin was confused by the unexpected answer and didn't know what to say. Meanwhile, we're transported to a local bar. Jack, consumed by rage, forcefully struck a red-haired girl. He had called over to try and calm him down. The blow was brutal, and the girl fell to the floor, hitting it hard, even as she lay injured. Struggling to stay conscious, Jack continued his vicious attack. He hated the way she tried to calm him, feeling that she pitied him, something he despised. A crowd began to gather, outraged by what they were witnessing, but no one had the courage to intervene. After all, this wasn't the first time Jack had acted this way. Noticing the stares from the people around him, he grew even more irritated and asked what they were whispering about. However, no one answered. On the contrary, one by one, everyone scattered, quickly dispersing. They ran in every direction, desperate, anything to escape the girl's terrible fate. Still seething with anger, Jack spit on the girl, then snatched his phone. When he heard someone call out to him, he answered the call without a second thought, asking if the person on the other end had managed to find Lu Yi's address. The answer was no, but his contact had a plan. Jack listened closely, not hesitating for a moment, and asked if the plan was truly flawless. Well, he was told that success was absolutely guaranteed. His expression shifted. His furious eyes burned with a clear desire for revenge against Lu Yi. He wouldn't stop until he got it. With a voice laced with pure malice, Jack declared that as soon as they found him, he'd send the remaining money instantly. The call ended, and our focus shifts to Lu Yi, who had just logged into the game world. He stood before the magnificent Mirrored Kingdom's central building, pondering the mirror copy's max level, which was level 30. He knew that at his current level, he couldn't possibly level up there anymore. The enemies were simply too weak. With that in mind, he decided it was time to leave. Turning around, he began walking toward the ruined kingdom, a place where he could truly grow stronger. However, as he paused to examine his appearance, he realized he couldn't keep wearing his starter armor. It was definitely time to buy a new set. He headed straight to a weapon shop. As he approached the display window, a system window opened right before him, listing all the items available for sale. Yet when he saw the astronomical prices, he froze solid for a few seconds. His expression instantly made it clear. He simply couldn't afford that much for armor. Disappointed, he left the shop and continued walking through the Mirrored Kingdom. He soon realized there was no point in staying. It was impossible to get the necessary materials needed to craft proper equipment here. So, he decided to head to the ruined kingdom, where he could easily snag these materials and craft powerful level 20 gear. However, he could afford level 20 gear. Directly, he chose not to rush things. After all, he'd hit level 30 soon enough. Plus, he also needed to manage his real-world money. Wasting no time, he headed straight for the ruined kingdom, where he planned to join a team, knowing it would drastically speed up his progress and help him snag equipment even faster. Upon arriving, he saw countless teams, recruiting players for their ranks, to explore dungeons of all different levels. Some were happily accepting level 20 players, while others were strictly seeking level 30 players. For tougher rates, he stood aside for a moment and overheard two players chatting about a new guild order. They mentioned a recent brutal raid on the level 40 Chaos dungeon. 10 players had participated, but every single one was defeated and had their stats reset. Lu Yi knew there were only 4 strict restrictions for successfully completing a dungeon, regardless of the number of team members involved. In fact, the more people who participated, the greater the rewards at the end would be. However, there was one crucial detail. Once inside the dungeon, there was no way out until it was fully completed. Furthermore, in Yuan World, dying in the ruined kingdom meant a complete reset and the devastating loss of all equipment. For this very reason, teams were unbelievably selective when recruiting new members to their ranks. With the incredible skills he possessed, Liu Ye believed he'd be accepted without a single problem. Convinced, he confidently approached the first recruiter, but was immediately rejected, as the team only accepted level 30 players. He tried again with another group, but was turned down because of his low-quality gear. On his third try, he didn't even get a word in, as the team was already completely full and wasn't looking for any new players. Utterly frustrated and completely crestfallen, he sank to his knees. He couldn't believe no one wanted him, even after he'd soloed strikes. A level 30 boss, he believed his strength should count, regardless of his level or gear. He'd already proven he wasn't weak. Discouraged, he considered grinding easier dungeons for basic gear, but knew it'd be a long, tedious grind. Still, he mustered the strength to stand, preparing to follow this sole option, when sudden footsteps sounded behind him. Right then, a voice announced the team needed one more member. Curious, Lu Yi turned to see what was up, not grasping who the offer was for. Before him stood Jack, smiling with a calculating gaze. Jack suggested he join their expedition into a dangerous level 35 dungeon, designed for 10-player teams. Exchanging glances with Jack, Lu Yi sensed something was off with the proposal. Still, Jack kept talking, assuring him the team was strong enough to handle challenges on their own. They just needed one more to complete the party. To activate the raid portal, they needed one more player. Surprised, the protagonist couldn't believe his eyes. He also felt like he'd seen Jack somewhere, but couldn't pinpoint where. Jack didn't give Lu Yi time to think. He said if he wasn't interested, he'd find someone else, not wanting to miss this. Lu Yi immediately cut him off and accepted. Jack just waved a hand, telling him to follow. Together, they headed to the level 30 portal entrance, designed for a party of 10. When they arrived at the meeting point, near the ruined royal portal, they found a huge crowd. The surrounding players wore impressive armor, leading many to comment on the leader's unexpected choice. No one expected him to recruit a rookie, armed with just a simple pistol. Lu Yi watched the other players, quickly realizing they were incredibly well-equipped. Their purple gear practically screamed at. Over half the team boasted equipment of timeless rarity. He gripped his head, pondering if he could snatch at least some of their precious gear. Suddenly, one of the players shouted, declaring that, since everyone was finally gathered, they should depart immediately. He was eager to hit level 40 as fast as humanly possible. A bald man approached with a smile, saying that upon reaching level 40, they definitely need to change their gear, and if that were the case, he could just hand his old gear over to the group. However, the player just smiled, flat out refusing, unless someone would buff his weapon with 3 rare items from their inventory, which predictably no one accepted. The group then started heading toward the portal, with Lu Yi slowly trailing behind them. As he watched the players, he noticed they all seemed to know each other extremely well. He couldn't quite grasp why they called him for this level 35 mission. However, upon noticing the team's malicious smiles, he realized this supposed friendship had ulterior motives. The portal finally burst open, revealing a vast, desolate desert expanse. Right in the center of the stark landscape stood only a mysterious crystal. Jack and another player were the first to rush through the portal and immediately began to survey the area. Soon, one of the team members quickly noticed that the mission objective was to protect that very crystal. Jack immediately took charge, barking orders for everyone to surround the crystal and ensure its absolute safety. Everyone followed the instruction, everyone except Lu Yi, who hesitated for a long moment. That's when Jack issued a sharp warning. Anyone who let the monsters reach the crystal would have to personally pay for the damages, right out of their own pocket. Lu Yi was genuinely surprised by the team's organization, though he skillfully hid it. Still in no rush to get into position, he continued to observe the crystal carefully. Suddenly, a notification flashed before his eyes. The mission loaded just a few seconds later. Another message quickly informed him that their objective was to protect the crystal from 3 relentless waves of enemies. At the bottom of his screen, he spotted the crystal's health bar, and the penalty for failure, death for all players. Just then, a loud shout ripped through his thoughts. Someone yelled, announcing the monsters were attacking. Lu Yi gazed out across the desert, but saw nothing but an unnerving, dense fog. Soon, however, he realized this wasn't just any fog. It had been generated by the monsters themselves. From within the thick smoke screen, an enemy burst forth at incredible speed. The creature, resembling a spider, boasted absurdly massive fangs. The bald man shouted directly at Lu Yi, telling him to get closer to the crystal. He warned that if Lu Yi didn't follow orders, he could be killed without a second thought. The protagonist obeyed instantly. Meanwhile, a swarm of monstrous insects swarmed toward the bald man, who stood ready, clutching an immense axe. It looked like his game was about to meet its end right there. But the man had entirely different plans for this raid. With a single, devastating swing of his axe, he decimated several beetles at once. He watched the others, who were also relentlessly wiping out large beetles, as if they were mere ants, and realized their teamwork was absolutely top-notch. The protagonist quickly understood that this group knew exactly what they were doing. He felt utterly useless in that battle, realizing he didn't need to try so hard, as he might just get in their way instead. Jack was systematically destroying the monsters one by one, until he suddenly paused and gave a serious look to his sword-wielding ally. With just a knowing glance from Jack, the ally instantly understood he needed to let one of the monsters slip past him. To the protagonist, without hesitation, He allowed the first enemy that attacked him to pass, pretending he didn't have time to defeat it. The spider-like creature then advanced menacingly toward the protagonist, aiming straight for the crystal to destroy it. Yet, the young man didn't hesitate for a second. A smile played on his lips as he heard the others yelling for him to protect the crystal. They'd let a monster slip past their defenses. It only took him mere seconds to dispatch the enemy. At that moment, he realized that despite their decent teamwork, their combined strength was merely that of an average player. They couldn't even compare to the Strike clone he'd recently vanquished. A notification then popped up, informing them they had successfully protected the crystal from the first of 3 waves. The next wave would arrive in 10 minutes. After clearing out all the remaining monsters, they settled down to rest. One of them commented on just how skilled the protagonist was. At first glance, no one would guess he was a true master, since few could defeat a monster 10 levels higher while wearing beginner's gear. The swordsman who'd let the monster slip past was still blaming himself for his mistake. If the group's 10th member hadn't suddenly vanished, there wouldn't have been a gap in their defenses. The bald man reassured him, telling him there was no need to worry, since the problem had already been solved. He then turned to the protagonist and told him that during the next wave, he would need to fight alongside them on defense to ensure absolutely no monsters got through. The young man sitting next to Luya suggested they invite the protagonist to join their team so he could get proper recognition. He then asked the protagonist what he thought about joining their group. That way, he wouldn't have to search for people to form his own party. Besides, by playing together, they could tackle high-level challenges. The protagonist really liked the offer and even considered accepting it on the spot. Right after he agreed, the man in black armor asked Jack what he thought about Luyi joining them. Jack smiled and replied that he didn't mind him joining the group, but there were some conditions. New members had to provide their phone number and real-world address. This was to protect them from situations like the one they had faced before. Upon hearing this, our protagonist was utterly bewildered. He remained silent, his ears keenly attentive. Jack then launched into a tale of just how difficult it had been to acquire all that valuable gear only for it to be greedily snatched up by Sam for himself. And because of that, they were now struggling immensely against the monsters. If Luyi wished to join their ranks, he would first have to agree to their terms. Our protagonist immediately grew pensive. He grasped the entire situation perfectly, even without a single word explicitly spoken. Right after these words were uttered, Jack and his allies suddenly flashed truly malicious smiles that were utterly impossible to ignore. This, of course, only made Luyi even more suspicious. They claimed their sole goal was to invite him on a raid, and for a few tense seconds, everyone froze, unsure of their next move. Quickly, Luyi stood up from his seat and meticulously scanned the large number of mid-level players scattered throughout the hall. He quickly realized this was clearly no mere coincidence. They had chosen him specifically and intentionally. As soon as they entered the raid, they had acted overly friendly towards him. Then, they had deliberately allowed a monster to slip past to gauge our protagonist's true power. Finally, they had invited him to join their team permanently. A small smile playing on his lips, Luyi concluded that, based on every single thing that had transpired, they were attempting to extract information on his real world address. Glancing at Jack, who was practically radiating intense anger, our protagonist didn't hesitate to keep talking. He then suggested that Jack was likely the one truly in charge of the New Order, Guild's Mirror Realm. Before even joining them, he'd overheard those same 2 guys discussing the New Order Guild. They had mentioned that the guild possessed the real-world address of a 20-year-old guy who could defeat strikes. Ever since then, no one had ever seen that guy again. The young man, a faint smile playing on his face, stated he was utterly flattered that his incredible efforts were finally being recognized, especially for defeating level 30 strikes. With this crucial piece of information, our protagonist realized that Jack had orchestrated this entire gathering to uncover his true address, and then Jack would deal with him, still trying to hide his true colors. The protagonist insisted they must have him confused with someone else. Weapon in hand, the protagonist declared he never actually intended to join their team. He was simply looking to earn some money and gain experience on a raid with such a powerful team. However, after witnessing their true intentions, he realized there was no point in pretending anymore. After all, they were enemies, and enemies must be eliminated. Jack rose to his feet, glaring at the protagonist with a terrifying gaze. As his entire team encircled him, he then began to speak, mocking Liu Ye's idea that he thought he could defeat 9 players, all 10 levels higher than himself. Suddenly, one of the group members attacked the protagonist from behind, howling that he was shameless. Just then, a notification flashed before Liu Ye. It stated he had spent 30 power points to increase his next attack by an astounding 1,500 damage, leaving him with 414 power points and 450 cognition. In the very next instant, the sword-wielding attacker dropped dead, thrown several feet forward. Everyone watched in disbelief. In a single, devastating blow, he had slain an opponent 10 levels stronger than himself. Those surrounding him were utterly dumbfounded. No one expected a man to instantly defeat someone so much stronger than him. Then, something started to happen to the defeated character's body. It began to glow with an intense blue light, as if absorbing something and transforming into another substance entirely. After the transformation was complete, a strange sphere appeared before the protagonist. It was called a blue military pearl. Military pearls drop whenever a player is defeated, with a chance to receive a random item from a defeated player's equipment or backpack. The protagonist picked up the sphere and, with a serious expression, asked what's so impossible about defeating 9 players. Jack, absolutely furious, was ready to rip him apart, convinced the young man was far too confident. Jack then commanded everyone to attack the protagonist. Without hesitation, they all charged forward, intent on defeating him as quickly as possible. Unfortunately for them, however, the young man no longer possessed any mercy. Just seconds later, the first girl fell, just like the man with the gaping hole in his head. The protagonist eliminated them one by one. He knew that by killing these enemies, he was stealing their only chance to survive. But alas, he had no other choice. He couldn't die here. His sister wouldn't be able to obtain the players' identities. So no matter what they said, he had to become stronger. With his current strength, he wouldn't be able to protect his sister. When Yuan World inevitably took over their world, the protagonist decided he needed to rise to the very top. But first, he had to eliminate those who might dare to stand in his way in the future. Therefore, to achieve his goal, Liu Ye decided to walk over the mountain of bodies piling up around him. Jack and his entire squad were paralyzed, wondering why they couldn't possibly kill him. After all, their levels were far higher than the protagonist's, and their gear was undeniably better. The young man was extremely irritated, though he had already guessed the protagonist was strong. All of Jack's allies tried to persuade the protagonist to stop. They believed that if he killed any more of them, they wouldn't be able to clear the dungeons and would lose all their resources. The protagonist replied that it didn't matter to him, as he could simply go to the secret mirror zone and do the same thing. Whatever he lost, he could recover in a single day. But for them, the situation was different. Their equipment would be lost, and they lacked the strength to defeat the mirror realm characters. Jack grew even more irritated and said he could gather people to stop the protagonist from entering the secret. Despite the mirror zone, Liu Ye just chuckled in response. He then began systematically eliminating Jack's allies. This was something Jack himself simply couldn't comprehend. Jack desperately wanted to order them to prevent further casualties. Yet, before he could even utter a single word, 2 players right behind him were already lifeless. As his companions fell one by one, Jack's mind flashed back to a pivotal moment, when he greeted an exceptionally influential figure. This person had sternly informed him they absolutely had to remain the top players in Yuan World. If they successfully maintained that elite position, it wouldn't matter what they did to achieve it, because he would unequivocally support them. However, staring intently at them, he then added that should they ever fail, he would not only withdraw all his support, but also expose every single one of their crimes, ensuring they'd face immediate and severe punishment. When Jack snapped back to reality, he realized every single person around him was deceased. Only he remained. Liu Ye was ready to deliver the final blow to Jack. But Jack immediately dropped to his knees, pleading for mercy, begging the protagonist to spare his life. The young man offered no reply, just stared him down with an intensely serious expression, which only ignited an even greater fury within Jack. He felt so utterly pathetic it made him sick to his stomach. Jack declared that if his life were to be spared, he would unveil the ultimate secret of Yuan world. Luya simply smiled, then urged him to speak at once, to hold absolutely nothing back. Jack then demanded the protagonist promise to kill him immediately after he finished speaking, but he was violently sent flying several meters backward. Luya stated that since Jack clearly didn't want to talk, perhaps it was better for him to simply pass on to the next world, since he no longer truly cared about the secret. Jack landed a few meters away from Luya, but astonishingly, he neither disappeared nor dissolved into pearls upon impact. He had somehow survived the devastating blow and began to struggle, attempting to stand, his body trembling, which genuinely astonished the protagonist. Luya was visibly impressed by Jack's sheer resilience, pondering how he had managed to endure such a direct and powerful attack. Suddenly, a distinct noise echoed from the distant reaches of the desert, and immediately, he deduced that a second, even deadlier wave was about to commence. Jack then asserted that Luya must possess some of Yuan world's deepest secrets himself. There's no way he could have gotten this strong otherwise. What truly stunned Jack, however, was that even he couldn't handle Lu Yi because of this unexpected development. He planned to report everything to his superiors. After that, Lu Yi wouldn't just have Jack to worry about, but would likely die and be sent straight back to level 1. Jack, now back on his feet, continued, asking if the protagonist really thought he could stand up to people stronger than him like Jack. That was absolutely impossible, since very few people could level up that way. When Lu Ye's apparent secret became useless, Jack was sure he would no longer hold any advantage. Jack, completely defeated, began to beg again, asking the protagonist to just let him go. In exchange, he would reveal his secret, and together, they could use Lu Ye's incredible strength to clear the rest of the dungeon. Lu Yi smiled and asked why Jack thought he would die and be unable to clear the dungeon by himself. Jack couldn't believe the protagonist's words. He was only level 28, and no matter how strong he was, everyone has their limits, or so Jack believed. But suddenly, the protagonist asked, what if I had level 56 gear? It wouldn't be hard for me to clear a level 35 dungeon, would it? Jack couldn't believe Lu Ye's words. The protagonist held 2 mysterious pearls in his hands and asked if this was by any chance the gear he wasn't supposed to have. Looking closer, Jack saw the blue orb in the man's hands. He couldn't believe what he was seeing. The surprise on his face was unmistakable. With a confident and determined smile, the protagonist shouted for the blue orb to open and release its equipment. In an instant, the protagonist appeared, dressed in yellow and black armor. He wore a frost tank top that gave him incredible buffs, and it was also purple ranked. A purple ranked rapid combat suit protected his entire body, offering resistance, strength, agility, and armor requiring level 30. The combat gloves provided the same attributes, emphasizing raw sensation, but the strength stat had been completely removed. The violet-ranked high-speed combat boots granted the protagonist incredible agility, but the most crucial item was the purple-ranked beam katana, which boosted Lu Ye's attack power by a whopping 260 points, and even raised his defense by 30. Now, our hero boasted truly incredible stats. Based on combat calculations, he now commanded the skills of a level 46. A smirk spread across his face as he realized he should thank the men who had just fallen by his hands, since he'd gotten free equipment from them. With his powerful gear, his combat abilities had more than tripled. It just showed that his opponents were utterly incapable of seizing opportunities to truly defeat him. Jack was utterly stunned. He couldn't believe Luya had nearly tripled his stats. Moments later, he realized everything was starting to irritate him. Surprise morphed into pure rage and hatred. He started shouting that, no matter how much stronger the hero had become, he still couldn't clear the dungeon alone. It was simply impossible. Around them, The sounds of monsters approached with incredible speed. Then, one monster leaped straight onto the crystal. The heroes mercilessly cut down anyone who approached. Without even blinking, after killing one ant, several more instantly appeared. Hundreds of ants swarmed from behind, trying to kill him and reset his level. Liu wasn't about to give up so easily. One by one, he cut down the ants, giving them absolutely no chance to win. Liu knew that if he didn't win, he couldn't protect his sister. Thanks to the pearl's powerful effect, he didn't even need to use his intellect to eliminate the insects swarming him from all sides. He was ready to bravely defend the crystal. Despite enemies coming from every single direction, his life was on the line, and he absolutely needed to secure this victory. He continued to defeat the ants one after another. The pile of corpses just kept growing, but the assault felt endless. When Luya's health plummeted to near zero, he unleashed a powerful healing spell, allowing him to instantly rejoin the fray, fully refreshed and energized. Meanwhile, Jack, managed to slay a handful of ants. He noticed the protagonist's health was critically low, but to his utter shock, he healed instantly. Jack stared in utter disbelief. He figured Liu was chugging rare potions, and screamed that it wouldn't matter in the end. Jack was confident he just needed to keep dodging, and he could ultimately outlast Liu. Liu paid absolutely no attention to Jack, focused instead on slaughtering the monsters around him. Jack kept screaming that he would pay for his arrogance, but Liu simply smirked and told Jack to worry about his own survival instead. He declared he could easily annihilate these monsters and perfectly handle the situation himself. So even if Jack groveled for mercy, it wouldn't save him. These words enraged Jack even more. He simply couldn't believe that, even in such a desperate situation, Liu remained so unbelievably confident and brazen. Staying highly alert, Jack noticed an ant trying to ambush him from the side, and instantly dispatched it. Meanwhile, Liu continued to relentlessly eliminate an impressive number of monsters, but he unleashed his healing ability once more, continuing his fight tirelessly without a pause. Hours passed as he ceaselessly slaughtered ants. There was no hesitation in his eyes, only grim resolve. Only a vast field of corpses surrounding him. But the creatures never stopped their relentless assault on the crystal. Jack, watching from the sidelines, watched the massive, staggering number of dead monsters, and simply couldn't believe his eyes. He thought it was utterly impossible for Liu to possess so many healing potions, as the sheer amount he had already used was far, far greater than any player could possibly carry for such a test. As Jack remained fixated on the pile of bodies, he failed to notice a monster suddenly materialize, grabbing his hand and dealing a devastating blow. His health instantly plummeted to a minimum once again. He frantically reached for a healing potion, but as he opened his inventory, he saw it was utterly empty, leaving him bewildered. Realizing this was truly the end, his health had plummeted to rock bottom, with enemies relentlessly closing in from all sides. He had absolutely no strength left to keep fighting. The monster began tearing him apart, attacking him relentlessly, wounding every vulnerable part of his body. Even in such a desperate, dire situation, Jack couldn't accept that he would die first, without seeing Liu perish before him. But glancing over at the hero, he realized Liu was still effortlessly handling all the enemies, killing them without the slightest trouble. He decided Liu would pay dearly for this insolence. Once he respawned in the lobby, the young man, however, watched everything with a smile, because he wasn't tired in the slightest, and still had plenty of strength left. He even relished facing all the monsters that relentlessly attacked him. After all, that's how he gained experience and honed his combat skills. At that moment, Jack was forcibly sent to the lobby, his level completely nullified. A notification then appeared on the protagonist's screen, indicating that his team had only one person left, himself. By meeting all the conditions, the reward for completing the dungeon would be increased an astonishing tenfold. After several grueling hours of fighting the insects, the hero crouched on the ground, utterly exhausted, trying desperately to catch his breath. An impressive number of defeated ants lay piled around him, all eliminated solely by him. And finally, the relentless wave of attacks ceased. The swarming insects finally stopped attacking. And looking at the massive mountain of bodies, he felt a wave of relief, knowing the ants would disappear before the second wave. If that didn't happen, he wouldn't know where the crystal was hidden and wouldn't be able to protect it effectively. Not far from him, he spotted an inscription, Golden Orb. The Golden Orb. This powerful orb allowed a player to receive 3 random items from a defeated player's inventory. As soon as he laid eyes on the orb, Liu Yi quickly sprang to his feet, a wide smile on his face. He simply couldn't believe it. He had actually found the Golden Orb, just as he'd expected from the Mirror Copies manager. Finally, he'd done something right. Approaching the Golden Orb, our protagonist picked it up, pondering for a moment. Knowing his mental energy was dangerously low, he'd only have about 10 minutes to rest, which would barely restore half his strength. Naturally, this wouldn't be nearly enough, especially since he was on the 3rd and final wave. Now, a harsh realization hit him. He shouldn't have attacked the Zukov so early. He should have waited for the final wave. Now all he could do was hope the Golden Orb would yield something valuable to help him face this brutal final wave. As he spoke the words to open the Golden Orb, a notification materialized before him, offering a crucial choice, equipment or items. Liu Yi began to reason logically, thinking that his strength, agility, and armor would soon hit 100 points. He wondered if he could get equipment that would drastically improve these 3 stats and skyrocket his combat ability. Therefore, he confidently selected the equipment option. Immediately, a notification popped up declaring the system was opening the orb, and the equipment would be retrieved. He received a set of stunning purple and gray amber equipment, which instantly boosted his agility by 10 and senses by 5. Then, the exact same. Second ring landed perfectly in our protagonist's right hand. The third amazing item he got was a purple class pendulum pistol. This beauty granted him an incredible 200 strength, 30 wisdom, and a precise locking ability. Plus, it could triple the damage of each attack, or even stun the target completely. The pistol also boasted an automatic reload, but it needed a full minute to recharge completely. Liu Yi was in a complete state of shock, unable to believe his own eyes. To him, this was simply incredible. He instantly knew this was his lucky day, as he not only received massive buffs for all his gear, but also dramatically upgraded his main weapon. Accessing his stats, our protagonist noticed that 4 of them had now surpassed 100 points, making him incredibly happy. This meant his combat prowess was mightier than ever before. After a brief moment of reflection, Liu Yi suddenly realized that if it weren't for those who attacked him, he never would have achieved such power. So, he decided to thank them. Our protagonist smiled, ready to face whatever came next. He was prepared to dive into battle, knowing his only true disadvantage was his level. But once he protected the crystal in this dungeon, he would easily catch up to the top players. Now let's shift to the city at night, where we find ourselves in a room used for players to revive after death. Jack was in the middle of the room, speaking with his boss, his head bowed low. He claimed Liu Yi definitely possessed some kind of secret that granted him stats far exceeding his level. After everything that transpired, Jack insisted that if this wasn't true, he wouldn't have fallen at the protagonist's hands. He told the boss, even if you don't believe it, you should know about the complexity of the ruined Kingdom Dungeon. A level 28 player, clearing a level 35 dungeon alone, was absolutely absurd. Something was definitely amiss. Otherwise, he couldn't have wiped out everyone. The boss, looking at Jack with a scornful gaze, declared he was giving him one more chance. Within a few days, you need to level up, he commanded, and I'll deal with Liu Yi personally, by sending others to handle him. Jack thanked his leader for the second chance, promising he would try his best. Now, we're transported back to reality, to an unknown cafe where Yun was yelling at Neon. Because her entire family was playing the game, the girl explained they weren't just playing, but also raking in a ton of money, which left Yun utterly astonished. Neon had a hard time understanding why, but her parents forced her to level up with them daily. She was already exhausted from it, and didn't want to do it anymore. Although her parents wanted Yin to keep playing, she wanted to do it on her own terms. Suddenly, the girl stood up, and asked him why. Neither she nor her brother hadn't played that math-based game with her at her own house. She then suggested it would be fun to play with her brother. Yin was utterly stunned by the sudden proposal. Besides, she didn't even have a device to play on herself. But then, a brilliant realization hit her. This was her golden opportunity to get Yin and her brother to interact. Because if they played this game together, it would be a guaranteed success. All she needed to do was slip out of the house, under some pretext, and leave them totally alone. This was her incredibly cunning, masterful plan. So, she suggested they all head to her house. Now, let's rejoin our protagonist, who is now facing the third wave, advancing rapidly upon him. He was mowing down his opponents, one after another. Lui had never experienced such raw power before. As he donned the new gear, he could feel every cell in his body surging with strength, especially when he exerted himself in combat. He felt as if the blade in his hands was utterly weightless. His steps grew faster, more agile. His jumps were impossibly high, allowing him to tower over all the creatures swarming around him. In these moments, he felt truly majestic, standing out dramatically from a horde. Lui's gaze falls upon something intriguing, a creature that even confuses him slightly. But he doesn't look away, not for a single second. He decides to unleash his most powerful attack, leaping down and obliterating an entire horde of ants with a single devastating strike. But that wasn't enough for him. He craved more power, more experience, more skills, and most importantly, as he relentlessly destroyed the ants, he yearned to reach places he had only ever been able to gaze upon from afar. Then, just as he was soaring high above all the monsters, the very same creature he'd noticed before suddenly appears right in front of him. It was a fearsome level 35 spider boss. Without a moment's hesitation, our protagonist decides to finish it off. Right then and there, suddenly, notifications begin to flash before Lui. The character, he earned huge congratulations for clearing the dungeon, and then snagged his well-deserved rewards. He racked up a truly impressive amount of experience, a whopping 360,000 points, which then got multiplied by an insane factor of 10. And to top it all off, our protagonist snagged the epic title Dungeon Defender. For every ally lost while in the dungeon, the player's stats surged by a full 10%. Now, his stats were absolutely through the roof. Upon hitting level 36, he possessed an immense amount of experience, and his stats, including damage, defense, resistance, strength, agility, endurance, intelligence, perception, distributable points, health, and cognitive power, were absolutely astonishing. Once he hit level 30, he unlocked the ability to choose a skill branch. One option was Silence, an active skill that, when activated, reset all skill cooldowns by 5 seconds. The cost was 50 cognitive power points, and with each level increase, the skill added 1 whole second. The second development option was called Captivity, which would tether the enemy to its initial spot for 10 seconds once the monster was defeated. Our character then sat down, utterly satisfied, and still couldn't believe he had defeated such a huge monster, all by himself. Most importantly, he was overjoyed to have gotten so much stronger in just a few short hours, something he himself found hard to believe. Now we shift our focus to the real world, specifically at the protagonist's home, moving from the virtual realm to reality. Lui stepped out onto the balcony for some fresh air. He thought about his recent actions, incredibly proud of his impressive recent achievements. He was just eagerly waiting for the opportunity to dive back into the game, to make his sister as strong as he was, so she could protect herself in the future. Suddenly, Lui heard a door close behind him. When he entered the room, he saw his sister was finally home. She was in the hallway, clutching a gaming device. She said it was incredibly difficult to acquire the device, but she was lucky to have a wonderful friend, Nian, who helped her get it. However, the device caused her to lose her connection. His sister strolls into the room, and someone follows close behind her. Lui is utterly shocked, unable to believe his sister actually got a device to enter Yuan world. But then his expression shifts. He's suddenly overflowing with joy, because now she can finally play with him, with a huge smile on her face. Yin explains that since Nian got the device for her, She needs to be properly thanked. And so, Nian will be living with them. Nian greets Lu Yi without hesitation. But he still can't believe this is a real device. For Yuan World, it's absolutely incredible. However, his sister feels completely ignored, and she's extremely annoyed. Lu Yi picks up the box and starts questioning how they even got the device. Not that it really matters to him, though. The important thing is he has it now. His sister grimaces. She can't believe her brother is ignoring the beautiful girl right next to him, completely fixated on his new toy instead, especially since he knows Nian is going to be living with them now. Nian, meanwhile, is very surprised that some device could make Lu Yi so incredibly happy. Now let's rewind one day to an unknown level 40 dungeon. A vast forest under a bright moon surrounds the area. Several people sit around a campfire, discussing how clearing this level 40 dungeon would allow them to surpass the second-ranked team, which would significantly boost their profits. They're also talking about the incredibly strong girl who helped them find a village. This girl is from the New Order group, and her team ranks third. Her name is Wei Shi. Suddenly, a man named Chao Yang approaches her. He suggests she could ask to join the first-ranked team after clearing the dungeon, which would speed up her development. Confused, she doesn't understand what he's saying and completely ignores his approach. Then, one of the team members tells the captains that if Wei Shi leaves, they won't be able to progress as quickly anymore. They ignore the man's concern and begin discussing how the team would have no future. But what if she just left? Bruce, they poured so much into her. They simply couldn't let her walk away, especially when they needed her most of all. The captain took a deep, steadying breath and declared they couldn't hold anyone back just because of their own feelings. He believed she'd never forget them, even after reaching the New Order's highest rank. The captain decided to confirm it, and with a smile, he asked her. In response, he only saw Wei Shi smile. The team member, head in his hands, realized he couldn't just wish her luck on her new path. Another member agreed with the captain, saying he was right, and there was no reason to hold back Wei Shi's progress. As they were too weak, everyone started saying that if the girl ever had a hard time on the first team, they'd gladly welcome her back. It would be just like before when she first joined. They would help with whatever she needed. They were all incredibly kind to the girl. In response, she smiled, thanked them, called them brothers, and said they were so good to her. Since they were being so kind, she wanted to ask one last favor. After she said that, she looked very embarrassed, and everyone around her was shocked, not understanding what she meant. There was a dead silence. A few seconds later, an intense light appeared. All the team members fell, showing no signs of life. Whoever was still alive used a healing skill, and couldn't believe what they were seeing. Wei Shi, who had been with them the whole time, had betrayed them. She wanted to be incredibly strong, but her level wasn't high enough, so she decided to activate the dungeon's reward. This way, she would become the strongest player. In the Yuan world, the captain was furious with her. After everything they had done for her, was this how she repaid their kindness? Wei Shi just laughed and waved her hand, saying there was no need to be so angry. It was just a game, and they could always get back up and level up again. The captain refused to listen anymore, telling her to go straight to hell. He called her an ungrateful creature, then attacked her away, but she expertly dodged the bullets, reminding him she'd warned him countless times, no matter how much he shot at her. In the Yuan world, bullet speed was capped. Therefore, a bullet couldn't outpace a player whose agility stat was over 100. With that, the girl simply got behind the captain and pierced his neck. Wei Shi repeated coldly. That cold steel was an entirely different matter, because its power depended purely on the user's stats. Speed and damage weren't limited at all, so she effortlessly killed the captain. The next day, we're transported to a level 45 dungeon, where 20 people are battling a formidable humanoid monster. The captain reports that several people have run out of potions and asks if he's stocked up enough. The captain, known as Strikes from the New Order, was fighting with impressive strength, and everyone around him admired his incredible skills. He was truly excellent at what he did, but his immense power had a significant drawback. To build up enough power, he had to wait a long time. However, when he finally reached his maximum strength, he had no trouble defeating even the biggest, most terrifying monsters. The captain was level 45, and beside him was Blazing Fire of the New Order, also level 45. During the fight, the captain noticed another player with similar power. He immediately wondered if this player was an enemy, or if they could be persuaded to join them. The master quickly replied that he had just killed the captain of the Mirrored Kingdom. This surprised him so much that he started to scratch his head in disbelief. The captain then asked about a girl named Wei and what she was currently up to. The scene then shifts to a forest outside the control zone. A girl is standing on the edge of a cliff, intently looking at her system screen. She received a private message from Blazing Fire, telling her she needed to meet a new player, our protagonist, because of his immense power. Wei smiled happily as she read the message. It didn't mention killing or recruiting the character, but she knew powerful players were quite rare. If she managed to recruit the protagonist for the guild, it would mean she was doing everything for the guild's benefit. However, if she killed him, she would be going against the guild's development. The master, seeing this, didn't care about our character's future and left the decision to her. And the girl, with her great worth, had to prove her competence by recruiting the protagonist. After thinking it over, she decided she would kill him. Meanwhile, at Lu Yi's place, he sat at the desk in his room and drafted a plan of action for the game. He needed to level up his character and gear to 60, and also prepare a fortified camp in the real world before the apocalypse in his past life. He remembered the highest level any player had ever reached was 60. If he could reach that level before the real world was taken over, he would effectively be the strongest player. With that power, he could ensure his own safety and his sister's. With the collapse of public order and the scarcity of resources, only the most powerful guilds could restore balance. In this scenario, food became the most valuable currency. Therefore, it was essential to stockpile supplies and establish a safe camp for him and his sister. With the funds he had, he decided to rent a neighboring building, while the rest of the money would be invested in buying rice and canned food. Now, all he had to do was wait for the supplies to arrive. In the game, he was only level 36, still far from his goal to reach the max level. He just needed to stay alive and keep gathering resources in the real world. That way, he and his sister could live in peace. After the takeover, upon entering the game with his sister and her friend, he led them to the Armory Pavilion. He explained that in the world of Unworld, strength was the most important skill, and it was based on weapon practice. To truly maximize their growth, it was crucial to master all types of weaponry and awaken their true power. His sister meticulously analyzed the spear, while he reminded Nianchu that skill without ki was utterly useless. So they needed to practice with all the weapons until they unlocked their full potential. Currently, Nianchu was at level 32. They both readily agreed to the plan. After that, Lu Yi walked towards the exit. Watching them, he reflected on how his actions had completely changed the course of history. In his past life, Nianchu hadn't come to his house. He didn't believe his interference was related to her bringing the device for Lu Yun. In the past, thanks to Nianchu, he and his sister had survived for 3 whole years. Now, he felt it was his turn to repay her. With this fierce determination, he ran out of the pavilion, practically jumping for joy. He felt he was getting closer to his goal. Reaching level 60 half a day later, Lu Yi emerged from a level 35 dungeon, now standing at level 37. One of his team members, smiling, commented on his impressive strength, saying he could clear a dungeon designed for 10 players all by himself. Another teammate agreed, mentioning that without him, the group would have a much harder time. Excited, they decided to tackle the dungeon again. But Lu Yi refused as he had other priorities. The disappointed players insisted he add them as friends and promised to call them next time. He smiled, scratched the back of his neck, and agreed. However, upon returning to the team's finding room, he nervously clenched his fists, thinking about a huge problem. Clearing a level 35 dungeon for 10 players took at least half a day, maybe even a full one. The experience gained there was equivalent to half a level if he continued at this pace. In 20 days, before the real-world takeover, he would only reach level 50. Reaching 60 would be impossible. Sitting alone in the empty hall, he reflected on his first time conquering that dungeon. That's when he was crowned with the title, Dungeon Protector. And it dawned on him, there was only one solution. By ruthlessly sacrificing 9 of his teammates, he could totally maximize his experience gain. In his past life, dungeons like this were infamously known as slaughterhouses, and players who resorted to this tactic were reviled as gutter rats. If he walked down this dark path, he would become exactly like them. But what if this was truly the only option left? His thoughts were suddenly cut short by the chime of a new notification. A system window instantly materialized before his eyes, announcing a new message. He opened it and saw a new dungeon invitation. It was a level 40 expedition, a party of 10. Reading the incredibly familiar name on the invite, he felt surprise. Then that surprise morphed into pure joy. Leaping up from the bench, he exclaimed, "This is the very girl who, in his past life, became the strongest fighter." Liu pondered intensely why she would suddenly invite him to a dungeon. If he accepted this invitation, he'd have an incredible chance to level up fast. A confident smile crept onto his face. Plus, she was a member of the elite New Order. But in his past, he had never met her under circumstances like these. So he was certain she was scheming against him. His legs trembled for just a moment, but his eyes held perfectly steady. Only the dungeon could truly allow him to grow. With that thought solidified, he made his decision. He accepted the invitation. The team roster immediately popped up before him. The players' levels ranged from 37 to 45, spotting familiar names on the list. Liu cracked a knowing smile when he saw Yin Fei. He remembered how, in his past life, he'd seized the reward from a desperate situation by brutally finishing the quest alone. To do so, he had utterly destroyed all of his comrades. He recalled his old teammates absolutely trashing him. In the general chat, the girl nicknamed Cookie had a similar tale. But in her case, she started harassing other players. In the end, she killed them all, claiming self-defense. Turns out, the other team members shared equally troubled pasts. This dungeon's team had been personally handpicked by Wei Si. Liu thoughtfully stroked his chin, wondering. He wondered how Wei Si could possibly have known that these specific players would cause trouble. After joining the group, a new chat interface popped up. He announced that with everyone now assembled, it was time for them to head out. Wei Shi then sent a precise map point for their destination. Lin Fei, spotting the new member, immediately questioned Wei Shi's unusual choice. He highly doubted this was the player she had mentioned, and why he was still stuck at level 37. Wei Shi coolly replied that on this team, levels absolutely didn't matter. What truly mattered most was raw strength. Liu opened his map and quickly noticed. Most members were already in Muksu City, while the others were deep in the out-of-control area, or, even worse, already on their way there. His expression grew serious as he grimly analyzed the unfolding situation. The out-of-control zone was an incredibly dangerous place. Muksu City's vast controlled territories were meticulously divided into 5 distinct zones. First, Muksu City itself. It served as a crucial resource resupply hub for all players. All dungeons within the city were completely under control and had been modified ages ago. There were beginner-friendly dungeons, along with greater challenges. The especially dangerous zone was specifically designed for players seeking extreme challenges. The controlled danger zone, on the other hand, was completely, drastically altered, with all its monstrous creatures sealed away within the city. He had actually been to one of these dungeons before, alongside the infamous Chicken Crown. Next, the Chaos Zone, a truly deadly territory. Muksu's influence over its dungeons was almost non-existent. Fearsome creatures above level 30 roamed completely freely outside the dungeons. But the out-of-control zone was even terrifyingly worse. Players met their end almost instantly upon entering. Brutal creatures above level 70 just wandered about. Finally, the utterly terrifying destruction zone. Muksu City had absolutely no control whatsoever over this area. The horrifying creatures from its dungeons couldn't even be sealed away. Max-level monsters capable of annihilating absolutely everything. After some time passed, Liu was already deep within the out-of-control area, nearing their rendezvous point. Liu Yi was dashing through the dense forest, when suddenly a piercing scream echoed. He spun around, trying to pinpoint the source of the cry. Moments later, monstrous figures crafted from branches and leaves burst into the forest clearing. Spotting them, He quickly ducked behind a massive rock and watched as the creatures charged towards the stream, ensnaring everything with their creeping vines. He quickly realized these monsters weren't particularly strong on their own, but their sheer numbers posed a serious threat. Even a single sound could draw them in overwhelming waves. That earlier scream? Definitely a careless player. After a tense silence settled once more, Louis cautiously peeked out. The monsters had moved on. He wondered if the player who had screamed was even still alive. He leaped from his hiding spot, determined to keep pushing forward. He pressed on towards the meeting point. But then, out of the corner of his eye, he caught sight of something rapidly approaching. A gleaming spearhead was flying straight for him. He reacted instantly, snatching the weapon mid-air and twisting his body to dodge the follow-up strike. His attacker advanced, and Louis tried to get a read on them. The opponent gripped their spear tightly and lunged again, but Louis skillfully dodged once more. Now he was face to face with his assailant, whose eyes blazed with fierce excitement. Louis drew his katana, unleashing a swift counterattack. The enemy gripped their weapon with both hands, expertly blocking the blade with the spearhead. Then, a wide grin spread across their face. The impact created a thunderous bang, sending dust and leaves erupting everywhere. After a few heart-pounding seconds of silence, they stood eye to eye, intently sizing each other up. Lin Fei, the player who had ambushed him, wore a look of utter satisfaction. It seemed he finally understood why Liu Yi had been chosen by their captain. Liu Yi frowned, a moment of hesitation crossing his face. Lin Fei, still beaming, admitted his own strength couldn't quite match Liu Ye's, but he felt he'd earned some respect. Before heading off, he reminded Liu Yi they needed to reach the meeting point. Move quickly, otherwise they'd be swarmed by monsters. And just like that, he was gone, no time to waste. It was only then that Liu Yi lowered his katana and watched Lin Fei walk away. He knew this player possessed formidable power, and it was highly likely that Wei Shi possessed this same level of strength. The whole team was incredibly strong, but it remained unclear if anyone among them could claim the reward from this desperate situation. Still, the odds of them perishing in that dungeon remained incredibly high, though. Sometime later, he arrived at the meeting point, where his comrades were already gathered. He neared the portal. He paused as he noticed a girl sitting on a nearby rock, smiling at him. She rose, clapping to draw everyone's gaze, announcing she had a few words to share before they plunged into the dungeon. Our protagonist surveyed his teammates, realizing he was now officially part of their group, even if he still felt a flicker of doubt. The captain then spoke up, explaining that dungeons within the uncontrolled zone were notoriously unpredictable. Because of this, their first move upon entry had to be to understand its rules, no matter how peculiar they might seem. He emphasized that everyone needed to stay calm and rationally discuss their strategy, as this was the key to mission completion. The rest of the players nodded in agreement, and the girl approved of their serious attitude, before confidently leading them toward the portal, announcing it was time to move forward. While the others advanced, our protagonist paused once more, recalling his previous uncertainties. He delved into his own feelings and realized that ever since meeting Wei Shi, regarded as the strongest player, he had begun to doubt his own capabilities. He couldn't tell if this unease was insecurity, nervousness, or simply the fear of never matching them. He also feared the sting of failure and watching all his efforts vanish. But instead of letting these doubts overwhelm him, he gazed up at the moon, a brilliant beacon over the forest. Taking a deep breath, he pushed onward, absolutely determined to prove his worth. The moment they stepped through the portal, vivid images flashed before their eyes, narrating the dungeon's tragic story. A lonely doll was there, lamenting that her companion no longer wished to play. Leaning against the wall beside her, unconscious, was the woman she once played with. Without a hint of emotion, the doll declared that if she wouldn't play, it would simply find another toy. The hallways then filled with countless corpses. The true culprit behind this horrific scene? A small, blood-stained mechanical puppet. It expressed utter boredom, claiming its previous companion had been the most fun. Now, with no one left to play with, it declared it needed to go home. However, it then lowered its head, muttering to itself that this was no longer even possible. The cutscene ended, and the players suddenly found themselves at the very top of a circular tower. In the center, perched on a pedestal, was that same bloody doll. At the base of the structure, an eerie inscription read, "Hope and despair coexist." The team was still reeling, trying to process everything they had just witnessed, when one player questioned aloud, "What kind of dungeon did we even enter?" Another group member quickly agreed, "This is unlike anything we've ever seen." They cautiously moved away from the portal, and one player wisely commented that the sheer unpredictability of dungeons, their ever-changing maps and challenges, made the meta world both terrifying and utterly fascinating. Another grimly added that the most distressing part was truly knowing it was simply impossible to clear certain dungeons without losing your life in the process. Looking intently at the pedestal, they concluded the only entity present was the doll, which strongly suggested it might be the main key to understanding this entire place. However, before they could even react, the figure simply vanished, and immediately, the system flashed a notification to all players. The dungeon entrance has been sealed. To escape this predicament, they had to complete the mission Puppet's Tricks. The dungeon's objective was to destroy the puppet. A puppet would suddenly appear in one team member's backpack, while the other's task was to eliminate the puppet's owner. The dungeon would only be completed if the player with the puppet survived for a full 6 hours. If time ran out, the mission would fail. According to the rules, the puppet's owner could transfer it to another player if they managed to kill one of their allies. The protagonist was taken aback. As he read the mission description, he thought this dungeon seemed to be created, especially for those who sought rewards. In a desperate situation, the mission indicated that if the player left the puppet with the last survivor, they would have a 100% chance of winning the grand prize. The system announced the puppet had appeared, and the countdown had begun. Lou immediately decided to check his backpack to make sure he didn't have the toy. However, as he opened the system window, he stopped, realizing this wasn't the right time. He knew that once the other players calmed down, he would have to check if he had the puppet. If he did, he'd have to decide whether to turn it in, but that would instantly make him a target for everyone else. Facing two powerful fighters wasn't the best position, and his chances of death increased drastically. The other players started eyeing each other suspiciously, and the atmosphere grew tense. Liu Jian noticed that everyone seemed wary of the person next to them. Maybe they were hiding something, or perhaps they were in the same situation as him. It was then that Wei Shi clapped her hands, getting the group's attention. Liu shifted his gaze to her. As Wei Shi smiled and spoke, she suggested that, since everyone knew the mission's objective, whoever had the puppet should just give themselves up. Accepting certain death, she proposed that everyone would give a fair share of the reward. Wei Shi asked if all the players who didn't have the puppet in their backpack readily agreed with the idea. Most players quickly backed her proposal. Seizing the distraction, our protagonist spotted a chance to discreetly check his backpack, while everyone's attention was fixed on her. He quickly opened his system window and scanned his inventory, but then his eyes widened in pure shock. He found the puppet was in his backpack. He thought, I just joined this team, and they've already gifted me this puppet? Frowning, he glanced at his inventory once more, then quickly at the other players. His primary objective now was to eliminate one of the team members, so the puppet would pass to someone else. He had to get rid of this imminent threat, but he still didn't know who to target. Even if he handed over the puppet, he'd struggle against two powerful players who would surely show no mercy. Without waiting for a response, one player directly asked if anyone wanted to confess. Liu remained silent, lowering his gaze, but he was soon caught off guard by the team captain, who walked right up and faced him directly. With a confident smile, he stated, "It's time for Liu to admit he has the puppet." Liu was surprised by the sudden accusation, but quickly composed himself, his expression turning serious. As he processed the captain's words, one of the female players called him by name, claiming he liked to stand out. Then she demanded that he speak for himself. Liu, however, remained stiff and silent. He looked back at the other team members, noticing they all wore peculiar smiles. The memory of the glances they had exchanged sparked a growing suspicion. Slowly, he realized that, even without directly analyzing each other's reactions, They had found a way to confirm he had the puppet. They were all working together. Upon understanding the situation, Louis let out a laugh. It all seemed so obvious now. A sudden invitation to such a strong team. It was nothing more than a test in disguise. Still, he still didn't fully grasp the woman's hostility toward him. He concluded that this entire dungeon was explicitly designed to eliminate him. The sheer number of players gathered here was proof enough. He gave the female player an assessing look, and, analyzing the situation, he concluded that by inviting him to complete the dungeon, she had signed her own death warrant. After all, the only real reward in this desperate situation belonged to him. His smile widened as he began to truly understand the twisted game they were trying to force on him. The woman, in turn, commented that he was rude, but it didn't bother her. Louis had already shown his strength, but he was still far from being a match for the rest of their formidable team. They wouldn't waste time on pointless arguments. The sooner this battle ended, the faster they could move on to the next leveling session. Faced with this, he simply agreed. It was then that Lin Fei shouted, offering him a chance to defend himself. To him, this would only make the fight more interesting. After all, they wanted to crush his hopes little by little. Wei Shi, for her part, covered her face with her hands and lamented how truly cruel they were being. However, she soon pulled her hand away, revealing a cunning smile. With a sharp gaze, she stated that Luya shouldn't force them to act this way. Without hesitation, Luya quickly swapped his equipment for a pendulum and aimed the weapon at her. However, he hesitated before shooting. Wei Shi observed his hesitation and concluded he didn't want to act rashly. She also realized he wasn't even aware that he was being spared. The other team members, upon seeing the strange weapon he was holding, reacted with scorn, trading insults among themselves. They scoffed, boasting he should have been more careful. After all, a fool who just shot without thinking. That wouldn't stand a chance against opponents like them. Lin Fei merely smiled, pondering if they were warned about Lu Yi. It had to be because he had some special ability. Perhaps his shots had the power to imprison his enemies. The other players just scoffed, remarking he knew the metaverse. Metamagic prisons were well-known tricks in that world. One of the allies then suggested they take the situation seriously, because in the meta, it was possible to create traps. This specific type of technique was what they called a cage. Wei Shi laughed again, clearly enjoying the whole situation. Lu Yi then smiled, activating his capture ability. Wei Shi's smile vanished instantly, and she leaped back, stopping a few meters away. She looked down at herself, and, seeing she was still unharmed, tried to hide her nervousness for a moment. She shuddered and called out to Lin Fei, warning him they shouldn't mess with Lu Yi. She realized it would be safer to attack him together, to end this confrontation as quickly as possible. Meanwhile, Lu Yi kept smiling, satisfied that he had trapped Lin Fei inside the cage. The trapped players struggled to break free, but the chains held firm. The other team members reacted with surprise, crying out in shock at what had happened. Even Wei Shi stared at her teammate in disbelief at the scene before her eyes. It was at that moment that Lu Yi used his special pistol ability, called Lockup. The technique allowed him to choose between tripling the damage or stunning the target. He chose to increase the damage, and immediately the system announced that 100 knowledge points had been consumed. His next attack would deal 5,000 damage. With his eyes gleaming with determination, he raised a weapon, aimed directly at Lin Fei, and without hesitation pulled the trigger. The fired bullet cut through the air, heading straight for the immobilized player. The bullet pierced Lin Fei's body, tearing a huge hole in his stomach. His health points plummeted to 0, and he crashed to the ground. The system then declared that Lu Yi had successfully eliminated Lin Fei, also transferring the doll to another player upon a teammate's death. This triggered the Dungeon Defender title, boosting all his stats by a whopping 10%. On top of that, he gained a pearl as a well-deserved kill reward. Meanwhile, the remaining team members gaped at their fallen ally, utterly stunned by the sudden turn of events. Lu Yi, on the other hand, was deep in thought about his predicament and his greatest fears. The two scenarios that could spell his demise. The first possibility was confronting Wei Shi and Lian Fei in a direct, combined assault. The second, even more perilous, was the unseen presence of a fourth team member, someone wielding unknown power. After carefully assessing the available intel, he realized that among their adversaries, only Wei Shi and Lian Fei possessed the strength to truly challenge him. This meant the true danger resided in the first option. His opponents were clearly overconfident, because they severely underestimated his strength. Thanks to their fatal error, he swiftly eliminated Lian Fei, shattering the balance of their strongest duo. Now that he had significantly crippled their threat, he just needed to finish off the remaining members. A triumphant smile spread across his face as he realized victory was within his grasp. Although, the ideal move would have been to eliminate Wei Shi. First, she managed to dodge a shot at the very last moment. This was all thanks to her incredibly high perception, a trait that gave her a massive edge in fast-paced combat. Lu Yi then issued a chilling direct warning to the team, informing them that the doll had passed to one of them. If they wanted to protect their ally, they had to act immediately. Otherwise, he would simply destroy the doll, preventing any chance of revenge. Aware that the opposing team was now weakened, he knew he still needed to be cautious to secure his victory and claim the dungeon's reward. His next step was to identify the player, who now held the doll in their inventory and intended to hold on to it until the final moment. Hearing this, the team captain cursed loudly, then froze solid. A palpable sense of immediate danger made her whip around toward her team, ordering everyone to hold still. She knew it. Lu Yi was hunting for the player holding the doll. The other team members, visibly nervous, formed a tight circle around one of their own, desperately trying to hide them. The player in the center, terrified, instinctively recoiled a step. Lu Yi noticed her reaction and smirked, realizing he'd found his prey. The player's terrified gaze confirmed his suspicion. He mused that in this moment, she was utterly surrounded. Without a moment's hesitation, he propelled himself forward, activating his skill, boosting his stats by a staggering 200%. He charged directly toward his goal, determined to eliminate anyone who dared to stand in his way. With his katana in hand, he advanced, cutting down every player in his path. Their resistance was utterly insignificant. The system announced he'd defeated 6 opponents, increasing his stats by 70%. Some of his attributes now surpassed the 1,000-point mark. As a reward for these eliminations, he received new pearls, equipment, and items. Faced with the carnage, Wei Shi charged forward furiously, wielding her dagger and attempting to strike him. Lu Yi, however, reacted swiftly, blocking the attack with a precise movement of his weapon. Meanwhile, one of the players, nicknamed Cookie, trembling with fear, collapsed to the ground. Unable to react, the team captain, noticing his state, exclaimed that Cookie was still alive. But he had the doll. That meant Lu Yi was after the dungeon's true reward. Surprised by his sheer audacity, the captain scoffed, but Lu Yi only answered with a chilling smile. Her boots glowed as she activated her arcane leap power, allowing her to swiftly dart to the side. She warned her opponent that he had made a grave mistake, targeting her with nearly imperceptible speed. She began to circle around him. Lu Yi stayed alert, noticing that in an instant, she had simply vanished from his field of view. Before he could react, Wei Shi appeared behind him, ready to strike. However, anticipating her move, he turned and swung his katana directly at her. Wei Shi, more agile, dodged again and reappeared behind him, landing a powerful punch. Without giving him room to recover, she continued to attack repeatedly, drastically reducing Lu Yi's health bar. He then activated his recovery power, instantly restoring his health bar to full. Then, he raised his blade over his opponent. A surprised Wei Shi announced that the damage she had just dealt was 9,000 points, equivalent to 75% of his total health. She recognized she was facing an absurdly resilient opponent. The blows of their blades clashed with a loud clang. A confident Wei Shi stated that at this rate, he would run out of healing potions before the battle was over. That would guarantee her victory. Lu Yi, however, just smiled without hesitation. Wei Shi switched weapons and executed a sudden, powerful attack. The blow was devastating, reducing his health by 9,800 points. But just like before, Louis restored his health in the very same instant. Stunned, Wei Shi pondered what was happening. She knew the level 30 instant recovery potion restored only 1,000 health points, and each player could only carry 10 vials. Inside the dungeon, however, Louis had already regenerated over 19,000 points. In total, it didn't make any sense. While she was trying to understand the situation, she didn't notice Liu Ye's sudden movement. He lunged forward with a powerful punch, hitting her hard. Then, with a smile on his face, he apologized. Liu Ye confidently stated that he was the only winner. Wei Shi gritted her teeth, steeling herself. She dodged the very instant he launched another attack. He watched her, a look of distinct displeasure on his face, as she quickly retreated, stopping right next to Cookie. It was then that she made a crucial observation. Given Liu Ye's enormous health pool, she was convinced he possessed powerful support skills. Liu Ye smiled at her deduction, replying that Wei Shi, on the other hand, had invested all her stat points into pure dexterity. Beyond her incredible close combat strength, her speed reached an abnormal level. Plus, her attacks almost always landed as critical hits. For a brief moment, her expression turned serious. Then, she forced a smile and admitted that because of this very fact, her cognition power was extremely low. It left her completely exhausted. She now realized she was likely out of options. Perhaps, the best course of action was to simply kill Cookie and end this confrontation once and for all. Liu Ye immediately grew cautious. He realized he had somehow overplayed his own strength, pushing her to consider this extreme option. Wei Shi was just too fast. If she wanted to, she could have killed Cookie hundreds of times before he could even react. But if she knew she couldn't defeat him directly, why was she still hesitating? Her behavior seemed contradictory. Liu Ye then asked what exactly she was waiting for. If Cookie was still alive, it meant it wasn't time to celebrate just yet. The system then notified him that the enhancement of all his stats was complete. Additionally, his pendulum and captivity skill had recharged. His eyes widened, and without wasting a single moment, he pointed his weapon at Wei Shi, ready to activate his skill. However, his body suddenly froze in place. Confusion flooded his mind. What was happening? Before he could understand, Cookie delivered a fatal blow to the team captain. Wei Shi looked at Liu Ye with a confident smile. The truth was revealed in the following seconds. Shortly before, Wei Shi had instructed Cookie to kill her, and then took his own life. This ensured Liu Ye could never claim victory. She'd promised her companion double the reward if he followed the plan, and he did just that. Just after striking her, Cookie took his own life. Their bodies began to fade away. Liu Ye remained utterly motionless, stunned by the shock of what had just unfolded. It was absolutely unbelievable. Wei Shi let out a loud laugh before completely vanishing, calling Liu Ye a total loser and declaring his defeat. Once their bodies had fully vanished, Liu Ye was left utterly alone in the dark dungeon. He stumbled a step back, still utterly confused, until his legs buckled, sending him crashing to the floor. His mind raced with a whirlwind of questions. How did this happen? Why? Checking his inventory, he realized the doll had shockingly returned to him. That devastating realization hit him like a brick. The entire fight had been utterly nullified. He wondered why Wei Shi would possibly do something like that. Was it all just to deny him a potential victory? To him, that was absolutely ridiculous. He clutched his own head in utter despair, trying to grasp what he should do next. They had both died, and now the doll was back with him. If Wei Shi hadn't killed herself, and he had somehow managed to defeat her, the doll would have completed its journey by now. It would be in his inventory now, with no other players left. All that remained was to simply wait for his own death. The chance to change everything was lost so easily. He should have one. A loud, desperate scream echoed throughout the dungeon. After a long while, his breathing slowly stabilized. He lay sprawled on the ground, struggling to catch his breath, staring blankly up at the ceiling. He muttered to himself, there has to be another way. If all his allies were truly dead, then Yuan World wouldn't just let him lose like this. This meant there had to be another method, a way to get around this impossible situation. He slowly pushed himself up and cautiously looked around, desperately trying to think of all the possibilities. Then, he decided to thoroughly explore the room, determined to find any way out of this. Upon reaching the very edge of the platform, Lu Yi reached out. He felt an invisible presence right before him. He quickly realized it was a crystal-clear wall. As he scanned his surroundings, he concluded that this special dungeon's territory was confined to this cylindrical platform. After one more careful inspection of the area, he made his way to the central pedestal. Doll still in hand, he climbed onto the pedestal and stood, cautiously assessing every detail around him. Soon, his gaze landed on a distinctive plaque, engraved with an intriguing message. Hope and despair exist together. Looking closer, he noticed a faint scratch marking just below the main inscription. As he drew nearer, he realized something was written in tiny letters. He managed to decipher the words etched into the stone. "I can't open the door." As he touched the inscription, he felt the slab beneath his hand give way slightly. A distinct sound of a mechanism activating echoed through the air at that very moment. The system then notified him he had found the entrance to the Cutscene Research Institute. Immediately, new information appeared before him. To open the membrane, 1,000 cognition points were required. Lu Yi frowned. 1,000 points was a steep price. It was a truly significant sum, especially since his energy was already compromised due to various lingering effects. Even with a formidable strength exceeding 1,500, his last brutal battle had left him with just over 1,000 cognition points. He wasn't sure how to acquire more within this environment. By spending 700 points to boost all his skills by 350, he would then reach the 1,000 cognition points needed to finally open the membrane. This way, he would still have a surplus of over 300 points. Considering he was about to delve into unknown territory, he decided it was best to be in full combat readiness. Confirming his choice, the system registered the action. All of his skills were boosted by 350 points. The 700 cognition points were consumed. The remaining 1,000 points were instantly used to open the membrane. In that very same instant, the pedestal right before him suddenly morphed into a door. A powerful gust of wind whipped across his face. Out of nowhere, a male voice sharply called his name. The voice's tone was unmistakably urgent, pressuring him to make a snap decision. The voice then stated he had to choose between two critical options: display what follows you, or dissolve and map everything. Liu Yi blinked, uterligt konfuset. He couldn't fully grasp what was happening. The voice insisted again, warning that the choice had to be made instantly for his computing power to finally activate. Feeling utterly lost, Lu Yi desperately searched for logic. What exactly did these options even mean? And what would be the dire consequences of a wrong choice? He analyzed the context. If this was a fixed system test, then they were likely teetering on the edge of major disaster. The crucial point seemed to revolve around his computing power. He pondered if displaying this power meant ensuring his own survival, or if it was merely a tool to escape the imminent catastrophe. Reflecting on his past experiences, he realized he'd never gotten this far to face such an impossible dilemma. If the ultimate goal was to ensure his and his sister's survival, the most logical option would surely be to display what follows him. However, if the only path to avert the disaster was by utilizing an external resource, then the safer path would be to dissolve and map everything. Lu Yi understood that if the disaster was truly inevitable, the only way to confront it was to be fully prepared for the consequences. He also pondered that the purpose of mapping this computing power might be related to selecting specific individuals with certain unique qualities. But how could he possibly be sure he was making the right choice? After much deep reflection, he concluded that he absolutely needed to ensure the Forgotten Ones had access to the perfect computing power. After all, only a precious few could return to the characteristic of imagination. If the first world hadn't emerged, the players' levels would never have evolved to where they are now. Convinced this was the absolute best decision, Lu Yi chose to dissolve and map everything. The moment he confirmed his choice, sparks exploded before his eyes. He held his breath, anticipating the result. However, as soon as the light faded, He realized he was still in the exact same spot. His body remained motionless for a few seconds, until he finally frowned and looked around. Nothing had changed. The conclusion was inevitable. He had chosen the wrong option. Louis sat down, crossing his arms, wondering if the right answer was to focus on revealing who was following him. He still had 350 cognition points left. Because a parasite was in his body, the puppet kept him in a constant state of battle, making his cognition recovery incredibly slow. Even so, with the 5 hours remaining, he could gather 1,000 points and get the chance to take the test twice. That would be enough. All he had to do was wait. He closed his eyes, preparing to wait. After an hour and a half, the system notified him that he had accumulated 700 cognition points. He snapped his eyes open, sped up his recovery, and spent 1,000 points to open the membrane. Once again, he was presented with the same two options: focus on displaying who is following him, or dissolve and map everything. Louis was about to click the first option, but he hesitated at the last moment. If the test was just about choosing between these options, then why couldn't he just enter the research institute by making the right choice? If the door blocked the puppet's path, then it would never be able to enter the institute it considered home. Something was wrong. But what was it? Was a matter of knowledge, power, or maybe it was related to a specific trait. The available information indicated that the puppet had left the institute out of stubbornness, and now wanted to return, but the door was stopping it. Maybe it wasn't about the right choice, but the right attitude. Considering this possibility, after mulling it over, he decided to trust his gut feeling. And once again, he picked the second option. He made his way back to the platform, ready for another try. Nothing had changed. He only had one final attempt remaining. One mistake, and he'd be stuck waiting all over again. Even with the pressure mounting, he still believed in himself. He took a seat once more, settling in to wait. 90 minutes later, only 27 minutes now remained on the clock. Before the task ended, he quickly checked his cognition points. He saw he had accumulated a total of 700. Louis snapped his eyes open, using his remaining points, and swiftly activated the membrane. This time, the moment he chose the second option, he instantly backed away and felt the ground tremble violently beneath his feet. He leaped back just as the pedestal began to descend. A wide, satisfied smile spread across his face as he shouted out loud, "A triumphant I did it!" The hardest, most grueling part of the test was finally over. He was absolutely certain now. The real challenge wasn't simply picking the right option, but rather relentlessly insisting on the validity of his choice. The hidden door would only open if the exact same option was selected 3 consecutive times. A mysterious staircase, leading down into the depths, appeared before him. He glanced back at the grand entrance to the Research Institute, and grimly concluded that this secret level was clearly designed to be completed by a full team. As he cautiously walked down the echoing steps, he realized no one had ever truly completed this task. The incredibly difficult way he was forced to do it. He had to enhance all his skills to their absolute peak, rely solely on pure, unadulterated wisdom, and even activate a special, devastating counterattack. Without these crucial upgrades, opening that formidable door 3 times would have been utterly impossible. Right now, no one else in the world could access that hidden level. Louis knew he had been meticulously cautious. Nevertheless, desperation, he knew, could easily lead him to make reckless decisions. Being bold, however, didn't mean being foolishly reckless. If only he had known, before entering this place, that his so-called team was so incredibly unstable, he never would have made the grave mistakes that ultimately led to so many tragic deaths. He walked down a long, empty, and eerily quiet, and brightly lit hallway. At the path's end, he found a heavy door, and in front of it lay a gruesome, bloody corpse. As he drew closer, he saw it was a woman. Suddenly, a brilliant sphere materialized before him. Louis glanced down at his chest, surprised, and saw the sphere detach from him. It floated over to the corpse, merging into the body. Right after, the system then announced the evil doll had been purified. As a reward, Louis received 1% of the membrane's computing power. He sighed in immense relief. The system then announced that the desperate situation achievement had been unlocked. This triggered a cascade of incredible rewards. The system configuration began to rapidly adjust. Overcome with emotion, Lu Yi felt his legs go weak and leaned heavily against the wall. He quickly stored his weapon in his inventory. His legs were shaking, yet a smile crossed his face as he realized he was truly terrified of death. He covered his face with his hand, feeling a wave of shame for his reaction. The system then reported the configuration was complete. He received 22,464 experience points and 400 coins. His level skyrocketed to 44. His HP bar increased to 3,720. His knowledge power surged to 846. His combat power was now an impressive 898. Two powerful new skills were unlocked. Status Lock freezes the target's health bar and prevents them from spending knowledge power. Every 10 levels adds 1 second to the freeze time. All skills are applicable to the target for 10 minutes. Consumes 50 cognition points. Every 10 levels, the duration increases by 10 seconds. Lu Yi clenched his fists, buzzing with excitement. He still couldn't believe what he had just accomplished. He thought he had only defeated Wei Shi, but in reality, he had overcome something far greater. He leaped into the air, shouting with joy, laughing out loud with pure joy. The dungeon began to dissolve around him. Meanwhile, his sister and her friend had already mastered their weapon skills. The two looked at each other, thoroughly pleased. Wei Shi was waiting for Lu Yi at the player's resurrection point. 6 grueling hours had passed since she last saw him. He still hadn't returned. She crossed her arms, worried and wondered where he could be. Just then, Blazing Fire sent a message asking what had happened. Wei Shi replied with a single sentence, "There was a death." Blazing Fire asked if Lu Yi was responsible. Wei Shi clarified that in fact, she had been the one who died. For a moment, Blazing Fire was speechless. After a short pause, she added that she had obtained valuable information. He wanted to know what he should do. Ashai instructed him to arrange a battle for her. In the Mirror Realm, a single copy of Mirror would be enough to restore her level. Blazing Fire agreed finally. She mentioned that Lu Yi was the person he was looking for, and that he possessed a special support power. Blazing Fire sat in his guild's meeting room, frowning as he looked at a message from Wei Shi. The man sitting across from him said he knew how rare support power was, and offered to help in the uncontrolled zone. His nickname was Ouija, level 45, and he used his fists instead of weapons. He also possessed support power. He promised to help, but demanded something in return, 10,000 coins. The guild leader replied with a sly grin. That was no problem. Ouija then left the new order's headquarters, where his friend was already waiting for him. Seeing him, his friend excitedly asked how it went. They had all been jumping for joy, having scoured the entire network to find the owner of the support power. Ouija ignored the excitement and in frustration kicked a post, making his friend flinch. After calming down a bit, he said he had arranged everything. His friend exclaimed that this was the first step of their plan, and questioned why he was so angry. Ouija crouched down and yelled, furious that he wasn't the only player with support power now. They had to rethink their plan to reach the top of the new order. Meanwhile, Lu Yi was deep in thought in his room, staring intently at a piece of paper, where he jotted down all his theories. He mulled over the mysterious hash power permission, which granted him the authority to control the computing output of a specific large machine. He then wondered if the reward for upgrading the special dungeon was merely the start of some grand quest, or if it held a much deeper meaning. Lu Yi questioned what would truly happen upon reaching 100% computing power, and the link between the hash power permission and this mysterious test. Rubbing the tip of his nose, he felt exhaustion start to creep in, but he knew he had to keep pushing his mind. His future literally depended on it. He decided to get up, leave his room, and relax with a quick shower before diving back into the game. But as soon as he opened the door and stepped into the hall, he noticed Ninshu coming out of the bathroom, drying her hair with a fluffy towel. Seeing him, she stopped and waved cheerfully. He returned the wave with a small smile and headed towards the bathroom. But before going in, he glanced back at her. He mused about how there was always a pleasant scent lingering in the air. Whenever she was home, his face flushed slightly, and he scratched his cheek in sudden embarrassment. Suddenly, he slapped his own face, wondering, what in the world am I even thinking? He needed to hurry and get back into the game to set a goal for his next phase. After some time had passed, he was back in the game, heading straight for the pavilion, where equipment was crafted and sold. Standing at the terminal, he reflected on his current situation. He was level 44 and still needed to gain 16 more levels to reach level 60. To do that, he would have to complete a special dungeon 32 times, which would take about 20 days. There were only 22 days left until Yuan World became a reality. Time was simply too short, and he might not reach his goal in time. On top of that, he still had major issues with his equipment. There were only two ways to obtain metal or equipment. First, he could just spend his coins directly, or he could upgrade his lower-level gear. He currently held 11,021 coins. A hefty 6,750 of those came directly from special dungeon runs, while the rest were earned by dismantling and used gear. The system then prompted him, asking if he wished to forge 40 purple items at 650 coins apiece, plus an upgrade from level 30 to 40 would cost 400 coins. He quickly realized he was still short 3 crucial equipment pieces: a headpiece, a necklace, and an emblem. Combining these 9 pieces with the remaining 40 would set him back a whopping 5,550 coins. The system reported it would take 100 seconds to power up the purple equipment. Liu Yi calculated he'd need a grand total of 16,129 coins just to hit level 60. This meant one thing: he'd have to grind out over 40 more runs. He crossed his arms, deep in thought, realizing that if he truly wanted to reach his goal, he'd have to take risks and hunt for extra rewards. But who to target? Suddenly, a new message popped up, grabbing his full attention. Before opening it, he paused, hesitant for a moment, a growing sense of nervousness washing over him. News usually only arrived in emergencies. He commanded the system to open the message, and saw it was a private communication from the guild leader of the New Order. The message asked if he was free to talk. He was utterly surprised, remembering how, in his past life, other players had ruthlessly kicked him out, sneering that trash like him had no place in the New Order. After establishing itself in the Middle World, they seized the entire southern region of China and became the strongest guild worldwide. Their goal: to manage the elite. As long as someone was an elite, or possessed special talents, their very life depended directly on the New Order. Low-level players without special talents, however, were treated like trash, oppressed in every conceivable way. As someone who died in a past life, he could confidently say it was impossible not to despise this New Order. He frowned, his gaze fixed on the message, recalling how incredibly weak he'd been back then. He wondered what could be amiss. Blazing Fire wrote that he wanted to form a team, specializing in the uncontrolled zone, but they didn't have enough members yet. He'd heard Liu Yi possessed support powers, so he was inviting him to join the squad. If he had any conditions, he could state them, and they'd try to reach an agreement. Liu Yi then asked if they were only missing a support player. Blazing Fire confirmed it. This made Liu Yi incredibly nervous. Then Blazing Fire wrote, in other words, this was the strongest team in that world. He asked why they would even go to an uncontrolled area. Blazing Fire replied he had his reasons. Liu Yi responded that he'd think about it and message him back later. He wondered if he should agree, although this team almost prevented him from earning rewards. From madness, it allowed him to accumulate experience and coins several times faster than a regular squad. He wondered why he would go there. It's impossible to use the market's transfer gate to go directly to that secret territory. Besides, several monsters above level 70 live there. He decided not to worry about it for now, figuring he should upgrade his equipment first. The system reported that 650 coins were needed to craft purple equipment. Soon, the upgrade was complete, and all of his equipment stats dramatically improved. With this, his attack power skyrocketed to 9,900, defense to 716, and intelligence to 678, while the rest ranged from 134 to 2,011. His health increased to 6,030, and his cognitive power rose to 2,034. His current combat power was estimated at 102, Since his combat power surpassed 100, he just got an upgrade, becoming a Supreme Space Hunter. His attribute level leaped from +1 to +2. Thanks to this boost, his attack power soared to 11,400, defense to 892, resistance to 159, health to 8,040, and knowledge power to a whopping 2,112. The main character gazed at his newly upgraded gear. Absolutely thrilled, he marveled at the incredible boosts combat strength provided. After surpassing 100 attributes, his mark grew stronger, amplifying his strength by a full 30. If he kept improving his combat effectiveness, he'd be able to boost all his other attributes too. But how much more would he need? 200? 100? Or maybe 1,000? He suddenly frowned, a new thought crossing his mind. As he looked away, he realized that the Battle Force system could be activated, as long as he possessed power. But if he had such opportunities, then other players certainly did too. The members of the team, formed by the New Order's president, a team equivalent to a group of 10, made venturing into the uncontrolled zone a far more viable possibility than it initially seemed. Louis sent a message to Blazing Fire, letting him know he'd be joining the team. The reply came back instantly, stating his decision was perfectly reasonable. He was told the team already had a player who wielded support power, ensuring there'd be no risk for him. Additionally, Blazing Fire mentioned Louis would receive a reward of 100 coins. Louis was genuinely surprised. He couldn't grasp the reason for such generosity. It was clear the leader was incredibly wealthy, but Louis didn't seem to care about that detail. If there were any ulterior motives behind the act, he'd at least benefit from securing enough money to feed himself. He relayed this information to the group, and the New Order president soon replied, saying there was absolutely no problem with it. Satisfied, Louis noted that he was now officially part of the team. The official invitation to join the team was extended and accepted without a hitch. Afterward, a message was sent in the general chat, inviting the other members to greet the newcomer. Wuji immediately showed interest, asking if he'd be the second support player, besides himself. After a quick exchange of greetings, the president scheduled a meeting at the North Gate. Before leaving, Liu Yi picked up a knife and reflected on his preparations. He decided it would be wise to turn off his headgear and carry a common weapon. If something unexpected happened, he would have a way to protect himself. He also thought it best to keep the knife hidden. The uncertainty of this new environment could put his safety at risk. Upon arriving at the North Gate, he examined the team's member list. Almost everyone was level 50, except for the 2 players with support powers. Moving a bit further, Liu Yi saw a crowd gathered. Blazing Fire was among them, arms crossed with a look of disgust. The other players seemed curious, and were closely watching the new member's arrival. Wuji noticed his presence first, turning to wave excitedly. Liu Yi walked over and gave a brief introduction. The greeting was returned with a smile. Blazing Fire broke the silence, commenting that he had never met holders of support power before. Now he had 2 right in front of him. Before they left for the uncontrolled zone, he informed them that there was something he wanted to show everyone. Liu Yi watched him more closely. The possibility that this was the president of a new order became more evident. If it were true, then he was standing before one of the most powerful people in that world. The president announced that before they set off, the 2 new members must demonstrate their abilities. The support players exchanged glances before Wuji stepped forward, offering to go first. Meanwhile, Liu Yi scratched the back of his neck. Baffled, he couldn't grasp it. Why should he prove his skills here? It made no sense. The invitation to join the team had already been extended. Yet, the request was still reinforced, with the argument being made that the team would feel more confident about them. Liu Yi simply nodded, understanding the logic behind the demand. Wuji then approached Blazing Fire and shared what he'd learned about his own ability. He explained that his power's activation distance depended on the range of the weapon he used. To demonstrate, he raised his hand and explained that his gloves had an attack radius of 1 to 2 meters. Because of this, if he were beyond that limit, his abilities would have no effect. Blazing Fire understood quickly, commenting that the relationship between the weapon and the ability made perfect sense. Liu, on the other hand, was utterly surprised by this revelation. If Wuji's gloves had such a short range, and he himself used a pistol, what was the real limit of his own ability? He had never stopped to think about it before. His powers had always just worked, without him needing to calculate the distance. Suddenly, he felt deeply uneasy. While he pondered this, Wuji began his skill demonstration. First, he activated a recovery power. Then he unleashed his second technique called Mantra. He explained that this ability could be incredibly effective against bosses, as it caused weakening, aging, and slowing effects. Next, he demonstrated his third ability, temporarily chaining the hands of the New Order's president. He informed them that this technique was called Silence, capable of restraining any enemy, including even powerful bosses, to finish. He stated that he'd leave his fourth ability as a trump card, reserved for more critical situations. Blazing Fire watched everything with a satisfied smile. Meanwhile, Liu Yi concluded that he would follow the same strategy. He would reveal only 3 useful skills to the team, keeping the fourth a closely guarded secret. When his turn arrived, he stepped up, explaining he wielded a blade with a devastating 3-meter attack radius, far superior to Wuji's. He then repeated the recovery ability demonstration, followed by his second technique, Blessing. His third ability was called Prison. To illustrate, he unleashed the technique on the president, who became completely immobilized. The ability was swiftly deactivated, and Liu Yi explained the effect lasted about 10 seconds, though he couldn't guarantee it would work on bosses. He also mentioned that Blessing could dispel any negative condition, even his own prison, just like Wuji's skill. He kept his fourth ability a closely guarded secret. At the end of the demonstration, he exchanged a look with Wuji, noticing the sheer confidence blazing in the other player's eyes. Blazing Fire absorbed all this new information before declaring he now understood both of their formidable capabilities. With that settled, he announced they could finally depart. Turning to the other members, he declared that due to the lack of support players, their group had always been confined to the peripheral areas of the uncontrolled zone. However, now that they possessed 2 holders of this power, they could delve deeper into the region and finally uncover its many secrets. The players met his words with roaring enthusiasm, raising their fists in a determined gesture. Before setting off, Liu Yi watched the scene, beginning to reflect. The rewards from exploring the Chaos Zone and the uncontrolled zone were practically identical. Yet, the level of danger was vastly different. He questioned what made the uncontrolled zone so special. Why the president of the New Order insisted on exploring this specific area, and if something truly hidden lay within. His train of thought was abruptly interrupted, when he realized he'd stopped walking. Wuji noticed his hesitation and waved. Grabbing his attention, Liu Yi started walking again, smiling at him before continuing to follow the group. But as he pressed onward, his expression slowly hardened. For him, there was only room for one support player on this team. It was only a matter of time before Wuji would be eliminated. And when that happened, Liu Yi would become the sole holder of that power on the team. Upon reaching the uncontrolled zone's entrance, the players were met with a decaying landscape that awaited them. Tall, ruined buildings were scattered everywhere, creating a dark and oppressive scene. The team captain took the lead, explaining the unique aspects of this area. Compared to the Chaos Zone and Danger Zone, the main difference was that the uncontrolled zone's difficulty was determined by the number of team members. For that reason, their group consisted of 10 people. However, even though this was the minimum number allowed, the difficulty would still be equivalent to a squad of 80 combatants. Because of this, they had to stay alert at all times and never act recklessly. Furthermore, the captain warned them that killing monsters in this region offered no rewards. Given this, if they encountered any, their priority was to find shelter immediately. If there was no safe place nearby, they would do their best to distract them. If it became necessary to sacrifice some team members to ensure the survival of the rest, then so be it. A heavy silence fell over the players. After that statement, without further delay, the captain leaped forward, throwing himself off one of the buildings. Without hesitation, the other players followed his lead, jumping after him. Liu Yi, on the other hand, remained crouched for a moment, scanning the surroundings. Then, he pushed himself forward and jumped as well. As he neared the ground, he noticed the darkness around him growing thicker. As soon as his feet touched the ground, he looked up at the sky. A flash of lightning illuminated the horizon, between the ruined buildings. Glancing to the side, he spotted his teammates, and close by, a monstrous creature perched on a half-demolished building. The beast, sensing the player's presence, unleashed a deafening roar. Liu Jiafronith, quickly assessing the dire situation. Blazing Fire, maintaining his cool demeanor, commanded those with camouflage skills to deploy them. Immediately, the players reacted swiftly, scattering in search of any available hiding spot. The moment they began to run, the monster leaped from the roof, giving chase. But before it could even get close, a second creature materialized out of nowhere, seizing the first monster with brutal force. The captive beast let out a piercing shriek, as it was crushed within the larger predator's fist, then violently hurled from the building. This new threat didn't hesitate. It immediately charged after the group. One of the players, hearing noises from behind, instinctively spun around to look. His eyes widened in shock, as he spotted a colossal monster relentlessly pursuing them. Recognizing the terrifying creature, he shouted a frantic warning to the New Order's president. A man-eating leopard was hunting them down. What was supposed to be a simple, easy entry into the uncontrolled zone had spiraled into an utter disaster. Blazing Fire, somehow remaining cool, warned them not to panic, ordering them to keep trying, to avoid direct confrontation at all costs. The group dashed into a narrow alleyway, desperately trying to shake off the creature. Wuji, intrigued, questioned the monster's true strength. In response, one of the guild members explained that, on a previous mission, 10 squads had been deployed to the uncontrolled zone to gather information. 5 of those groups were utterly wiped out by a single beast of that species. Even with such an alarming report, Wuji remained skeptical. The creature, meanwhile, seemed to have figured out the group's escape route. Instead of following them directly, it took a brutal shortcut, smashing through a building wall and reappearing before the players. At the very end of the alley, Blazing Fire, without a moment's hesitation, called out to a blindfolded team member and ordered him to distract the monster. The player immediately stopped, following orders, activating his taunt ability, its effect lasting for 1 minute. This slashed the leopard's speed by 10%, but in return, it boosted its attack power. The moment the ability took hold, the monster abruptly halted its charge, now focusing its attention on a new target, the player. He then dashed away from the group, luring the beast with him. Wuji watched the scene intently, considering how to best exploit the situation. He then shifted his gaze to Liu Yi, his expression growing even more serious. Without hesitation, he raised his hand and activated his marking ability on him. From that moment on, Liu Yi would be within the perception range of all creatures, within a 1,000-meter radius. The effect would last exactly 10 minutes. As soon as the skill was activated, all the monsters in the area immediately turned their attention to Liu Yi. The maniacal leopard, distracted by the blind player, suddenly stopped. The player cursed, confused, exclaiming why the creature had stopped following him. Meanwhile, Liu Yi kept running, oblivious to anything unusual. However, a monster suddenly leaped at him. With no time to react, he tried to grab it, but the force of the charge made him lose his balance. The beast brutally threw him against a wall. The impact was violent. The other players, noticing the commotion, stopped and looked back. Seeing the scene, they cried out in shock. Monsters were swarming from all directions, converging directly on Liu Yi. Confusion swept through the group. They couldn't understand why all the creatures were suddenly focused on him. It was then that Liu Yi glowed with fire, and his gaze met Wuji's. The smile on the player's face revealed his true intentions. Liu Yi immediately understood what had happened. Without hesitation, Blazing Fire dashed off to help Liu Yi. He ordered the others to fall back to their original shelter, vowing he would try to rescue him. His team members cried out to him, perplexed by his decision as he sprinted away. Woogie watched him, convinced he was utterly insane. At this rate, he'd never make it back alive. He told the others Blazing Fire seemed determined. But Liu Yi had now become nothing but a burden to the team. One of the players started to protest, but his attention was quickly diverted by the horrifying sound of crumbling buildings. The man-eating leopard was back. It seemed to have completely shaken off the taunt effect. With no other choice, the rest of the group reluctantly decided to head back to the shelter. Meanwhile, blazing fire relentlessly ran toward Lu Yi. Simultaneously, he kept a close watch on Lu Yi's health bar. He commanded Lu Yi not to even think about dying there. Suddenly, a monstrous foe leaped from the shadows. Blazing fire instantly noticed the attack, and quickly he drew his gleaming sword. With an incredibly agile strike, he attempted to slash the creature's chest. However, the attack didn't even scratch the beast's hide. He was utterly surprised to see just how incredibly tough these monsters' defenses truly were. The creature immediately retaliated with a vicious swipe of its razor-sharp claws. Blazing fire gritted his teeth and valiantly blocked the attack, but was still forced to retreat. He reluctantly backed away, watching the monstrous swarm engulf Lu Yi. The sheer number of enemies was absolutely overwhelming. For a fleeting moment, he truly believed he couldn't save him. But then, something extraordinary caught his attention. Among the stiffened bodies of the fallen beasts, he noticed that Lu Yi was still miraculously resisting. The monsters held him tightly by his arms and legs, but he absolutely wasn't giving in. Lu Yi then activated his freezing ability on himself. The system immediately notified him that cognition power was currently not being consumed. His health point stood at 5,036, out of a total of 8,040. There were only 10 crucial seconds left before the freedom status expired. Without a moment's hesitation, Lu Yi activated his blessing skill. He spent all his knowledge power points and boosted his attributes by 1,406. His stats had now surpassed 1,000 points, and in some cases even surpassed 6,000. The blessing surged through his body, dispelling the mark's sinister effect. He tightened his grip on his katana's hilt. The system blared that his energy had skyrocketed to 2,712 points, and his attack power had shot up by 50%. With an agile movement, Lu Yi swung his blade. All the surrounding monsters were instantly cut down in a single devastating blow. At the same moment, the man-eating leopard lunged forward. The creature tore past blazing fire, shredding walls in its relentless path. Lu Yi noticed its approach just in the nick of time. He grabbed the beast's claw at the absolute last second, desperately trying to hold it back. The sheer impact made his feet skid across the ground, but he held firm, quickly changing his strategy. Lu Yi swapped his katana for a pendulum pistol. He prepared the stun effect and aimed the gun directly at the monster's head. The moment the creature prepared to strike him down, he pulled the trigger. The shot was a direct hit. Seizing the opening, he switched to a conventional model and began firing non-stop. The bullets repeatedly struck the leopard's body until finally the creature gave way with a loud thud. The monster collapsed to the ground, unconscious. Lu Yi climbed onto the beast's corpse and looked around with absolute confidence. Beneath his feet, the leopard's body began to fade away. Blazing fire, utterly motionless, watched everything unfold in utter shock. His voice trembled as he muttered that Lu Yi was a liar. After all, how could a mere support player possess such incredible strength? The system notified him that only 50 seconds remained before the blessing's effect completely wore off. Lu Yi immediately ran towards the president, who was still utterly confused. Without wasting a moment, he told him they needed to get out of there fast. Then he kept running. Blazing fire, noticing a pack of monsters ahead, snapped out of his shock and chased after him. As he followed, he shouted for Lu Yi to wait for him at the shelter. The rest of the team remained at the dungeon's entrance, protecting themselves. One of the members commented that he had absolutely no idea what was going on with their president. He wasn't even sending messages, probably fearing he wouldn't get a reply. Another player agreed with this observation. Woogie, puzzled, asked why they didn't just go back. After all, what player could possibly survive under these conditions? One of the men replied that the president and Lu Yi were still alive. If their health bars hadn't dropped, it was because they were using skills that temporarily blocked damage. However, Lu Yi seemed particularly unlucky. No one knew exactly what happened, but for some reason, he attracted a huge number of monsters, from which it was impossible to escape. This was a real problem. After saying this, the man crossed his arms and gritted his teeth in frustration. Suddenly, one of their comrades exclaimed, "They've appeared on the map." Not far from the shelter, Wuji was surprised by the news. The others, however, were euphoric, absolutely thrilled. One of them warned the group that the two might bring monsters with them. He ordered everyone to prepare to defend the shelter. The team members positioned themselves at the entrance, weapons ready. One of them commented that he didn't hear any loud noises approaching. A short time later, the guild president entered the shelter. Alongside Liu, the group, relieved, celebrated their return. The only exception was Wuji. He watched them with a serious expression. In his mind, that president was a big problem. Meanwhile, the players began to praise Blazing Fire. They said he was incredible, that he managed to handle an extremely difficult situation and still save Liu Yi. They claimed he truly deserved his title. Blazing Fire, however, remained silent. His fixed gaze on Liu Ye's back revealed something different. After the two moved away from the group and walked to the back of the shelter, they sat down on concrete blocks. Just then, the president finally broke the tense silence. He declared all the pleasantries unnecessary. They needed a quick rest, then it was dungeon time. The players readily agreed, their excitement mounting. Meanwhile, Wuji's gaze was fixed on Liu Yi, who remained intensely serious, piquing his interest. He approached, sitting down beside him with a sly smile. He asked how Liu Yi managed to escape. He imagined it must have been a thrilling adventure. Liu Yi looked away for a fleeting moment, recalling the system dispelling the mark skill. Without a moment's hesitation, he replied that Wuji knew the reason perfectly well. Since it was his doing, Wuji visibly shuddered. Nervous, he waved a dismissive hand, asking, trying to play it cool, what exactly Liu Yi meant by that. Liu Yi held his intense gaze and stated he found it strange Wuji didn't know. He explained that the blessing was a skill capable of removing any and all negative effects, including the mark that had been placed on him. Wuji's eyes widened in utter surprise. Liu Yi continued, stating that the mark was a level 40 skill. Only 2 people there were capable of using it. A heavy silence hung between them. Liu Yi drew a gun, his expression utterly cold. He revealed that from the moment he entered, he considered finishing Wuji off. However, upon talking to him, he realized something crucial. Wuji's indecision didn't stem from fear, but from his sheer determination. He slowly rose, pointing the gun directly at Wuji. In a firm, unwavering voice, he said there was only one way to solve this. Wuji remained perfectly still and silent. Wuji cried out, utterly shocked by the turn of events. This is absurd. We're partners, not enemies. The rest of the team stood alert, watching the conflict unfold, not fully grasping the situation. Meanwhile, Wuji wore a cynical smile. He found it ironic that Liu Yi was about to be killed with a gun, just like in a movie. To him, this whole scene only reinforced the need to isolate Liu Yi from the team. Besides, if the mark ability was level 40, and only 2 people could wield it, then Liu Yi was certain Wuji had activated it. One player, utterly outraged, yelled at Liu Yi, demanding answers. But Blazing Fire stayed rooted in his seat. Not intervening, Blazing Fire simply watched, a faint, unsettling smile on his face. Wuji, still desperately defending himself, pounded his chest in protest. He claimed he'd merely asked how Liu Yi managed to escape the monsters, when suddenly a gun was aimed right at him. His expression burned with indignation as he whirled to face the president, desperate for support. He wanted to know if this was truly acceptable within the team. Blazing Fire, however, stayed silent. Wuji persisted, pointing out Liu Yi probably just wanted him dead, simply for being another support fighter. If that happened, Liu Yi would be the sole wielder of that power. Wuji feared that Liu Yi would start imposing his own harsh conditions, and that the president would eventually give in just to survive the dungeon. To him, this was fundamentally wrong. He then turned to the others and demanded their full attention. He wanted everyone to see Liu Yi was dead weight and had no right to stay on the team. Liu Yi, for his part, simply kept watching, unperturbed. To him, the situation was crystal clear. Wuji was the one truly responsible for this chaos. Turning back to the president, Wuji insisted Lu Yi needed to be replaced. One team member tried to interject, asking them to table the discussion for later, when they were safe. However, Blazing Fire stood up and placed a firm hand on the player's shoulder, stopping him. His attitude then indicated the conflict had to be resolved. Right here now, Wuji grew increasingly apprehensive. To him, Blazing Fire was utterly mistaken. It was then that the president stepped forward and firmly grabbed Lu Ye's gun, forcing him to release his grip. His gaze burned with disapproval as he fixed Wuji, demanding an explanation. For a moment, Wuji hesitated, still confused and unsure how to react. Then, a sudden pressure gripped his neck. The president had seized him forcefully. The question spewed out, harsh and cold. Why are you, constantly, trying to sow discord among the team members? The tight grip made it agonizing to breathe, and Wuji wondered where the president found such incredible strength. Struggling to catch his breath, he gritted his teeth and demanded, "What exactly is happening?" The president, his eyes blazing, didn't release his throat, and stated with conviction that he trusted Lu Yi far more than Wuji could ever comprehend. Wuji, still reeling in disbelief, argued that he couldn't understand the situation. After all, it was Lu Yi who had pointed the gun first, but his excuse was utterly ignored. The president then activated his ability. His voice was firm, as he declared that Lu Yi would never have done that, without a valid reason. Shock washed over Wuji. He couldn't believe the president trusted Lu Yi so much that he would simply ignore Wuji's words. To him, this was utterly unfair. He hadn't done anything wrong, but before he could utter another word, the Shadow Blood Shell ability was activated. A viscous red liquid completely enveloped him, trapping him inside the bloody shell. His body was sealed, and his health began to gradually plummet. He tried to activate a recovery skill, but realized in despair that he was completely blocked as his health rapidly drained away. Wuji started to panic, staggering. He lunged towards Lu Yi, and in a final, desperate act, grabbed his throat. His eyes were wide with terror, his breathing erratic. Then suddenly, his body went still. The last bit of air escaped his lungs. Powerless, he crumbled to his knees. His health hit zero in an instant. He vanished, and the bloody shell dissolved, splashing onto the ground, before reforming into blazing fire. Lu Yi, who had witnessed everything, finally broke the tense silence, calling out to his comrade. He then sat down and murmured a thank you, a faint smile playing on his lips as his mind replayed the moments where he faced all those monsters alone. A disturbing thought then crossed his mind. If he hadn't acted as he did, he might have been forced to eliminate all his own teammates. After a few moments of silence, Blazing Fire turned to Lu Yi with a serious look. He then made an unexpected proposal. He wanted Lu Yi to join the new order. He then added a promise. Within the guild, Lu Yi would hold the absolute highest position. Blazing Fire apologized for killing Wuji earlier, acknowledging the bad blood with the new order members. He believed recruiting a formidable player like Lu Yi was well worth overlooking any past conflicts. The other guild members were visibly surprised by their president's unprecedented request. Never before had he shown such hesitation when inviting someone to the new order. Plus, he was offering exceptional conditions, something utterly unheard of. One of the players quickly pointed out that everyone else in the guild had to pass multiple rigorous selection stages. He couldn't understand what made Lu Yi so special to receive a direct invitation. Lu Yi, in turn, posed an unexpected question. What's the price? Blazing Fire was taken aback by the question. Before he could answer, another player quickly jumped in, calling the question absurd. To him, it made far more sense for Lu Yi to hear the benefits, before even considering the costs. However, Lu Yi explained that when joining a guild, you shouldn't just consider the positives. The most important thing was to understand the true price. The guild president kept a confident gaze on Lu Yi. Then he lowered his head and subtly smiled. He claimed Lu Yi wouldn't have to pay anything. However, Lu Yi didn't believe him. He knew that when the time eventually came to pay up, he likely wouldn't be willing to accept the cost. The true cost was a willingness to sacrifice everything whenever the guild demanded it. including hard-earned levels and valuable gear. In return, he'd receive generous compensation. Liu Yi frowned, eyeing him with suspicion. To him, crossing the uncontrolled zone dungeon would inevitably lead to a massacre. His words had an immediate, chilling impact. The president and guild members instantly became alert. After a moment's hesitation, Blazing Fire nervously replied that he didn't believe it would end like that. He claimed the probability was minimal. Liu Yi, however, didn't seem convinced in the slightest. He stated many promises had been made, without any guarantee they'd ever be kept. Blazing Fire remained silent. Watching him closely, Liu Yi continued, stating he was willing to form an alliance, but he would never give up his equipment or his level. Furthermore, he wouldn't play with anyone else after this dungeon. The other players considered his words an insult. Liu Yi had no idea how incredible this offer truly was. The annual salary for guild members was over 2 million. The only price was giving up your own equipment. During the game, in their view, Liu Yi had to be either a fool or a lunatic. Blazing Fire, however, just sat on a concrete block inside. He admitted it was a shame to lose such a promising player, but he also understood that not everything revolved around the New Order. The Union was still a viable option. Liu Yi smiled, thanking him for his understanding. As he watched Blazing Fire's calm expression, his thoughts drifted to the past. If he hadn't been through so much stress and known the true importance of gear and levels for survival, his decision might have been different. With his current strength, even the president of the New Order was personally inviting him to the guild. For many, this would be a monumental opportunity. Looking down, Liu Yi mulled over the possibility. For just a moment, he felt a slight pang of regret for turning down the offer. But he quickly pushed those thoughts aside. With a faint smile, he reminded himself there was no need for an apology. The only reason the president wanted to recruit him was his immense strength. If he kept growing stronger and managed to stay alive, more people would inevitably seek him out. Meanwhile, Blazing Fire stared intently at the chat window. With a grim expression, in the chat, a player named by Show wished everyone good luck. He wrote that the first uncontrolled zone dungeon would be truly special. It would contain 10% of the membranes. Computing power. After a few moments, he added that one of the critical conditions for a perfect clear of this special dungeon was facing a desperate situation. He also mentioned that he had failed completely on his last attempt. Not only did he fail to clear it, but all of his allies tragically died. Now, he didn't even know how long it would take to recruit new members. Reading this message, the president gritted his teeth. He cursed mentally, thinking about the grave implications of that information. If one of the conditions for clearing it truly involved a desperate situation, then things could get far more complicated. His gaze fell on Liu Yi. He thought he'd failed the first step by trying to bribe him, but he knew Liu Yi's strength was still an essential asset. He had to keep pushing. Meanwhile, in the chat, Zeno commented that they seemed to be on the move. He stated that the group was heading to an uncontrolled zone to find the computing power. Membrane, by Show, added that 50% of that power was available. He said they would soon see how much each of them could claim for themselves. Chino then chimed in, mentioning that both the Chaos Zone and the Danger Zone also held 10% of this power. However, he didn't think it was worth investing in them. Another player quickly backed this up, explaining that the cost-benefit ratio, the uncontrolled zone, was the better bet. There you could actually snag 10% of the computing power all at once. In contrast, the Danger and Chaos Zones, however, would only grant 1% per attempt, despite the identical difficulty level. Wan Xiao proposed sending in players who were best equipped to handle the situation. And this intel sparked a thought in the president's mind. Perhaps it was time to recruit a player who excelled as a team player, like Strikes. If a full-blown massacre erupted and Liu Yi refused to cooperate, he'd be forced to use Strikes to eliminate him. Still, he deeply hoped it wouldn't come to that. With that, they pressed on with their journey. Liu Yi mused that, by temporarily linking up with the New Order's team, he'd finally get to witness the guild's full strength in action. This way, their assault on the uncontrolled zone's dungeons could finally commence. The team boasted a main tank, a player known as Fresh Meat Fan, plus a support tank, who was none other than the New Order's president himself. They also had a support fighter, who never removed his blindfold, and a deadly damage dealer, who wielded twin swords with lethal precision. In addition, a damage-gathering specialist stealthily took down monsters, playing a pivotal role on the team. With flawless coordination, the group only needed 4 hours to clear a level 50 dungeon. As they plunged deeper into the uncontrolled zone, the number of cleared dungeons soared. By the 4th day, the group had already conquered 12 dungeons. That's when Liu Yu finally hit level 50. The achievement brought immense satisfaction, especially because hitting this level unlocked a special level 50 rebirth power ability laid out before him. He could choose between 2 skills: cooldown, reset, and scan. The first ability allowed him to instantly reset the cooldowns of all his other abilities, but came with a hefty 12-hour recharge time. His second skill allowed him to scan the surrounding area, covering a vast 1,000-meter radius. It pinpointed resources, living creatures, and even nearby players. However, this powerful ability drained 100 cognition points every hour, at a steady rate of 10 points per second. What's more, this ability had no cooldown, and for every 10 levels gained, the scan radius expanded by another 100 meters. By the 3rd day in the chaotic, uncontrolled zone, Liu Yi had already soared to level 50. By the 6th day, the team finally located exactly what the guild president had been searching for. The moment they laid eyes on the special dungeon portal, deep within the uncontrolled zone, blazing fire couldn't contain his sheer happiness. Shortly after, a new player arrived to replace Wuji, who had sadly fallen in battle earlier. Before that, the guild president had to temporarily invite a second-tier member, just to fill the vacant spot. Meanwhile, Strikes was tearing through the narrow streets, weaving between the ruined buildings. With a precise leap, he launched himself from the ground, landing gracefully atop a building, where the rest of his team awaited him at the dungeon entrance. He paused, scanning his surroundings for a moment. Currently at level 56, his mere presence clearly energized the team members. The moment he arrived, everyone let out a collective sigh of relief. Strikes grinned, giving them a confident thumbs up. But then, with a playful taunt, he declared he had already warned those brainless chickens not to advance without him. The players' smiles instantly vanished. For a few awkward seconds, no one uttered a word until one of them retorted, reminding him that the same exact rule applied to him. Strikes merely chuckled, then waved over to the guild president and cleared his throat, trying to hide his embarrassment. He claimed no one had informed him of the situation. Blazing fire remained silent, giving Strikes a weary look. Liu Ye, who had been intently watching the entire scene, began to analyze the newcomer. He instantly recognized Strikes, one of the top 5 players in Met World, even before his reincarnation. Besides, Liu Yi had already defeated a copy of Strikes within the Mirror Realm. However, he wasn't sure of his true strength now, compared to the real deal. As Liu Yi pondered Strike's words, finally, he shifted his gaze to a team member. He approached the support player, pausing right beside him. Strikes then asked if he was the famous Liu Yi. The player met his gaze, a slight smile gracing his lips. He noted the guild president had mentioned that shine was strong enough to be compared to Strikes. At this, Little Toe, Blazing Fire, and the others grew visibly tense. Liu Yi, for his part, frowned. If Strikes dared compare him to a toe, then perhaps it needed to be severed completely. He'd better just pray he wouldn't have to pay with his life. Blazing Fire swiftly cut into the conversation, scolding Strikes and ordering him to stop his nonsense. Strikes, for his part, apologized to Liu Yi, explaining that he had a habit of saying impulsive things, but assured him he didn't have a bad temper. He then turned his gaze to the guild president and casually added that if Liu Yi was truly as strong as his toe, then that was certainly a good thing. Before he could utter another word, Blazing Fire raised a firm finger and ordered the others to take Strikes into the dungeon. The players quickly grabbed Strikes and started dragging him toward the portal. They declared that since he was so powerful, he should go first and prove his words with action. Strikes protested, claiming he wasn't like them and didn't need to be pushed around. Blazing Fire watched the team depart, then let out a sigh. He quietly wondered how he had ever managed to get that man into his guild. Now, alone with Lu Yi, he turned his attention back to the dungeon's entrance. Before them lay the portal to the long-awaited special dungeon of the uncontrolled zone. To temper his surging excitement, he took a deep breath before turning to Lu Yi. He informed him that the New Order's true objective in this zone was this very dungeon. Regardless of what transpires during the raid, the guild would be forever in Lu Yi's debt. Lu Yi was taken aback by that statement. This only intensified his curiosity. What exactly was the guild president after? Inside that mysterious special dungeon? Blazing fire, never taking his eyes off the portal, exuded confidence. After a moment, he took a few steps forward and ordered Lu Yi to follow. Before they entered the dungeon, Lu Yi reflected on his past life. He'd never had the chance to speak directly with the president of the New Order. As a low-level player at the time, all he knew were rumors and stories that painted the guild leader as a ruthless man, indifferent to the lives of others. However, after spending a few days under his leadership, Lu Yi began to realize reality was far more complex than he'd imagined. For a brief moment, he considered the possibility that they could become friends, but he quickly dismissed that thought. True friendships only formed between those with similar interests, and what he felt now was just a mere reflection of the temporary pleasure of teamwork. Deep down, he knew that if a conflict arose between him and the New Order, there'd be no room for companionship. The only person he could trust was his sister. If circumstances placed them on opposing sides, he would have to accept the guild as an enemy and fight with everything he had to survive. With this resolution in mind, he stepped through the portal. The moment he did, the environment around him changed abruptly. The scene unfolding before him wasn't real. It was a memory recorded in the location. Two figures watched with satisfaction as something moved inside an incubation chamber. The creature had been born successfully. After removing it from the incubator, the scientists confined it to an isolated room to monitor its growth. One of them, excited, commented on the experiment's success, praising the power of technology. The Research Institute's director, pleased with the progress, asked, as for the creature's brainwashing process, the results were far from encouraging. Every method they tried so far had only served to infuriate it. Then, without a single warning, the creature began moving at terrifying speed. Before the scientists could even react, the monster shattered the containment glass and charged straight for the director. In the scattered fragments on the floor, its reflection revealed a terrifying sight. Amidst all the ensuing chaos, one of the scientists, gravely injured, crawled desperately to a table. With what little strength he had left, he warned the others to stop the creature's escape. The director, filled with utter dread, made a desperate, final decision. He shot to his feet, shouting with urgency, declaring they had to destroy it. Then, he slammed a large red button. The scene shifted again, pulling Lu Yi and the rest of the team back to reality. They now stood atop a mountain, before the entrance to a research institute. The group paused for a moment, surveying the entire area. Lu Yi recognized this familiar pattern. Another special dungeon, with cutscenes integrated into the narrative. As he watched blazing fire, reviewed the mission information provided by the system, the interface confirmed the dungeon mission had been generated, and that teleportation was disabled. Mission, an experiment gone wrong. The objective was to transport the Screaming Serpent's life source to membrane number 304, located in the core of the Research Institute, for the incubation of ancient organisms. The mission, however, had strict rules. The life source could not be removed from the player's inventory. Their lives were directly connected to the item. Anyone who broke the bottle would die instantly. In a matter of seconds, a bottle appeared in each player's hands. Blazing Fire assessed the situation and concluded that everyone now had the life force they needed to succeed was now theirs. Ideally, they need to reach their destination without a single casualty. Taking a deep breath, the guild leader signaled, time to move forward. Lu Yi gripped the bottle firmly, examining it closely. Until this point, he'd only experienced 2 dungeons with cutscenes. One of them was during the special mission with Wei Shi. As the group prepared to press on, no one noticed the presence looming above them. High above, a shadow moved silently, watching their every step. The calm was shattered by a deafening scream. Suddenly, a colossal serpent appeared, its roar reverberating across the entire mountain. The group spun around immediately, a chill racing down their spines. As they stared down the creature, blazing fire reacted quickly, trying to coordinate the players and ordering them into combat formation. However, before they could react, the serpent let out a second scream, this time unleashing a powerful sound wave. The impact was absolutely devastating. Several players dropped to their knees, dropping their bottles, as they clutched their ears in agony. The moment those glass bottles shattered against the ground, their holders' bodies began to rapidly dissolve. The system soon announced the tragic outcome. 3 team members have died. Observing the scattered fragments on the ground, his gaze hardened. He realized he just lost 3 bottles. The system notified Lu Yi of a new condition imposed upon him. Watching the creature closely, he noticed Strikes was already charging towards it. The warrior seemed determined to face the serpent on his own, completely ignoring all caution. The team, noticing his impulsive move, reacted with grave concern. After losing 3 members, no one wanted to witness another death. Strikes showed no hesitation and launched himself at the monstrous beast. With impressive speed, his intention was clear. He wanted to avenge his fallen comrades. His strike landed with immense power, but to his shock, the blade left no visible mark on the massive serpent. Before he could even react, the creature's enormous maw gaped wide. In one swift, precise motion, it swallowed him whole. The rest of the team watched, frozen in horror. Some had already braced for such an outcome, while others were utterly speechless at how quickly they'd lost another comrade. Showing no further interest in the remaining players, the serpent slithered away, vanishing into the forest. It was then, however, that a crucial detail caught the guild president's eye. The liquid from the fallen players' bottles began to automatically distribute among the others. He quickly grasped the true meaning behind this. To perfectly complete the mission, it wasn't necessary for every single person to reach the destination alive, only for the 10 life source fragments to be successfully delivered. Meanwhile, some players were still discussing Strike's fate. The possibility that he was still alive was brought up. Upon checking the team roster, they confirmed his name was still active. This indicated he was still inside the serpent. Perhaps there was a way to rescue him. Faced with uncertainty on how to fight the monster, some team members started brainstorming strategies. The guild president quickly shut down the conversation. He seemed confident that, if Strikes had survived this long, he still had a chance to escape. The most important thing right now was to head straight for the research institute and complete their mission. Lu Yi analyzed the situation carefully. The president's actions reinforced his suspicions that he was aiming for a perfect dungeon run. The memory of when he himself had received 1% computing power for a flawless play flashed through his mind. He began to wonder if blazing fire was after the same benefits. With no other choice, the group pressed on. They maintained a fast pace towards the institute. 20 minutes later, as they neared their destination, one of the players checked the team app. He made a chilling discovery. Strikes was definitely on the move. He was moving at an abnormal, terrifying speed. At first, they thought he was simply running to catch up, but they soon realized something was terribly wrong. The chilling conclusion hit them almost immediately. It wasn't Strikes who was moving at all, but the monstrous creature that had swallowed him whole. The warning came far too late. Suddenly, one of the players noticed a rustle in the nearby bushes. He immediately alerted the president. Blazing fire froze dead in his tracks. He spun around just in time to see a screaming serpent bursting forth from the dense vegetation. Its massive maw was wide open, ready to attack him. Reacting with lightning speed, he activated his blood shadow skill. He narrowly dodged the attack at the very last second. As soon as he repositioned himself, he quickly assessed the dire situation. He ordered the players to snap into their combat stances. At the same time, he instructed Strikes to attack the creature from the inside out. If he was even still alive, the serpent, noticing the frantic movement around it, redirected its menacing attention to the players. The players decided to collectively assault the serpent. As they advanced, they landed powerful blows on the monster, but their attacks seemed to have absolutely no effect. The creature, seemingly impenetrable, remained completely unharmed. Suddenly, the massive snake swung its tail violently. Several players were brutally thrown aside, hitting the ground hard. They quickly recovered, restoring their health. Meanwhile, one of the fighters unleashed a whip to strike the creature right across its face. He tried to distract it using a potent taunt skill, moving erratically from side to side without hesitation. He sprinted in the opposite direction of the others, speeding right past the guild president, who was waiting for his chance to face the monster. The serpent then let out a truly deafening roar. Devastating sound waves tore across the battlefield. One of the players had absolutely no time to react. His health bottle shattered instantly. In an instant, his very body began to disintegrate. Terrified, he realized his gruesome death was inevitable. The rest of the group cried out his name, but there was nothing they could do. Blazing Fire and Luya stood by, silently watching the empty spot where their comrade had just been. The crushing impact of their loss was crystal clear. Another team member, still reeling from the shock, brought urgent news about the monster strikes. The player trapped inside the serpent's belly reported that its internal defenses were impossibly tough. He couldn't even scratch it from the inside. Blazing Fire turned his gaze back to the colossal creature. Up close, he noticed a peculiar detail. The monster's structure resembled an insect's, more than that of a snake. This explained its abnormal, horrifying resistance. Yuya quickly grasped the true, immediate danger of their situation. Since the bottles couldn't be stored in the inventory, the serpent simply shattered them with its piercing sound waves. Every single blow was a direct threat to everyone's life. The tension mounted, the terrifying possibility that nearly their entire team would perish. Right at the very start of the dungeon, seemed sickeningly real. A heavy silence fell for a moment. Then, without any warning, the screaming serpent began to move again. To everyone's utter surprise, it turned and vanished into the dense forest. The players were utterly confused. Why would the creature leave them alive after ruthlessly eliminating two of their own? As they desperately tried to find an explanation, they noticed the liquid from the broken bottle had been redistributed among the remaining flasks. The fluid's hue became strikingly brighter. Blazing Fire meticulously analyzed the situation and began to form a bold, new hypothesis. The monster wasn't just attacking them randomly. It was, in a twisted way, testing them. If a perfect clear truly was the president's goal, Luya pondered what it would actually take to achieve it. Killing the serpent might not be the solution at all. The real objective could actually be to connect all the remaining life sources. Blazing Fire ordered everyone to stay hyper-alert. Now that the monster had moved away, they finally had a chance to reach the research institute. No time to waste, they immediately set off. 20 minutes later, they reached a massive building. A colossal hole gaped in its wall, a clear sign something huge had escaped. One player quickly checked their map and urgently alerted the president. The serpent was still incredibly close by. Blazing Fire rapidly assessed their dire situation. To buy precious time, he made a drastic call. He ordered one player to smash their own bottle. The chosen player hesitated, stunned by the command. Another player quickly intervened, arguing they couldn't afford to lose another soul. Blazing Fire, however, was unyielding. With so many players, it would be impossible to defeat that creature head-on. What they needed now was blazing speed, not brute force. If they could lure the serpent away, they'd gain time to explore the institute. Faced with the tough, imposed decision, the player gritted his teeth and shattered his bottle. The system immediately notified another team member's death. As soon as the flask shattered, the screaming serpent instantly turned and headed in the opposite direction. The strategy worked. They'd successfully distracted the monster. Relieved, the players continued on their way. One, excited, praised the plan's sheer genius. Another stated they owed the captain a huge thanks. Thanks to him, they now had a way to track the dungeon boss's every move. Blazing Fire checked the map, confirming his theory. Meanwhile, Luya began to reflect. Before, he'd refused to spend on equipment and levels. Now, if Blazing Fire knew how to get a perfect clear, he himself could become a target. As soon as they reached the institute, in that kind of cramped environment, surrounding him would be far too easy. Blazing Fire urged them to hurry. The Institute's entrance was already in sight. The group sprinted through the clearing, leading to the building, reaching the stairs. They moved quickly towards a massive entrance. Lu Yi, however, suddenly halted, a crucial thought crossing his mind. He couldn't let them trap him in there. The other players noticed his sudden hesitation. They paused at the top of the stairs, and, without looking away, asked what was wrong. Lu Yi then turned to Blazing Fire. He posed a single, crucial question. What's the quickest way to wrap up this mission? Everyone listened intently, but remained silent, figuring he should brace for a potential fight against them. The president then frowned deeply and strode to the very edge of the stairs. In a grave tone, he declared Lu Yi was mistaken. The dungeon's difficulty level was exceptionally high, and he harbored no intention of harming him. His sole objective was simply to complete the mission. If Lu Yi truly didn't trust him then, he could absolutely wait outside, while the three of them finished the task. Despite the unknown perils lurking inside the Institute, the serpent's threat outside loomed far, far greater. Lu Yi remained silent, meticulously assessing the situation. Suddenly, one of the players sharply called out to him, blatantly questioning his hesitation. He demanded to know why Lu Yi distrusted the president. He thought it was nothing short of an absurd joke. Another player quickly chimed in, agreeing, pointing out they cooperated for a substantial time. There was absolutely no reason to doubt him now. Did Lu Yi truly expect the president not to treat him like a beloved brother? Lu Yi frowned, intensely weighing all his options. He discreetly stole a glance at the map. By his rapid calculations, strikes would arrive in approximately 10 minutes. The serpent attacked every 20 minutes precisely, which decisively meant that the next attack would strike in 13 minutes. If he was truly going to make a move, then, that it had to be before the president linked up with strikes. Blazing Fire then turned toward the entrance and, with a calm smile, stated that no one would ever be forced into anything. They simply needed to complete the mission, that's all. With that, he confidently stepped into the Institute. The other players, utterly annoyed, immediately hurled insults at Lu Yi, branding him a traitor, claiming they couldn't possibly trust him at such a crucial moment. They would simply go on without him. Lu Yi gripped his katana, grimly assessing his chances. The freeze status would last for 10 precious seconds. The blessing remained fully active for 60 seconds, including strikes. He now faced 4 formidable opponents with high combat power. If he used the freeze in conjunction with the blessing, he might have a chance to defeat them. If he made a mistake, he would lose his alliance with the New Order Guild. If he hesitated, all his efforts would be wasted. Blazing Fire noticed his indecision and turned around. Frowning, the guild members questioned Lu Yi with contempt. Did he really intend to attack them? Forget the alliance. His life was already practically forfeit. They weren't going to dirty their hands killing him. Lu Yi felt the answer was clear. Without further hesitation, he activated the freeze status and the blessing. His strength and speed increased dramatically. In an instant, he shot towards the guild president, who activated his skill. Blazing Fire's body vanished before his eyes. The players shouted incredulous at Lu Yi's decision. They claimed he was making a grave mistake, and wouldn't last long before they could react. Lu Yi swung his katana and cut one of the players in half. The victim's body fell to the ground before disappearing. The stunned player muttered that it wasn't possible. The system notified him of a teammate's death. Another player charged forward furiously, weaving side to side to try and trick him. Lu Yi waited for the right moment. He tightened his grip on his weapon, lunged forward, and delivered a precise strike. The system again notified him of a team member's death. Lu Yi checked the map. Blazing Fire was still in the same spot. Strikes, however, was getting closer and closer. Lu Yi gathered all his strength and attacked fiercely, shattering a part of the building's side. Debris rained down everywhere. Looking around, he checked the president's health bar. His HP was still full. This meant that despite the impact, he hadn't managed to hit him. He checked the map once more. Blazing Fire was still there, but there was no sign of him among the rubble. What kind of skill was that? Lu Yi then realized that strikes was very close. The system alerted him that his freeze status had expired. Gazing at the wreckage before him, Lu Yi defiantly bellowed out to the president, asking if he was nothing but a coward, too afraid to face him directly. Blazing Fire, however, remained silent. Without revealing himself, the system then notified him that the blessing's duration had also ended. Lu Yi grumbled to himself that if blazing fire was going to make cowardice a habit, he'd just keep hiding. But then, strikes had already arrived. Seconds later, a player's figure materialized in the clearing. Lu Yi spotted the movement on his map. Blazing fire had joined his ally, emerging from his invisible state. The guild president finally appeared. A malicious grin on his face, he taunted Lu Yi, commending his bravery, yet he noted that facing the man-eating leopards, Lu Yi had already revealed all his trump cards. Blazing Fire declared that ultimately, he'd only sacrificed 2 of his men. Lu Yi offered no reply, only a frown. Strikes, in response, drew his sword. Without hesitation, he and Blazing Fire lunged forward simultaneously to attack him. Hey, everyone, did you enjoy the story? I certainly did. If you want to catch the next part, make sure to subscribe and hit that like button. See you all in the next story.